The bathroom floor was cold against her cheek. Natalie Brooks pressed one hand to her swollen belly while the other clutched her phone, the eviction notice still glowing on the screen. She was 6 months pregnant, had lost 3 jobs, and nobody knew the father's name. Nobody could know. Because Adrian Caruso didn't just own half of New York's underground. He owned her one perfect night. It was the night that created the life now kicking inside her. The night she ran from, terrified of what loving a monster would cost. Then the bathroom door exploded open and the monster found her. Natalie Brooks had learned early that survival in New York required 3 things: keeping your head down, your expenses lower, and your expectations at rock bottom. At 23, she'd mastered all 3. Her studio apartment in Washington Heights cost more than it was worth. Her business degree from community college gathered dust between shifts, and her dreams of opening her own consulting firm felt like jokes she'd told herself in another lifetime. Tonight, those dreams felt even more distant than usual. Marcus, the event coordinator, didn't look up from his clipboard when he told her table 12 needed another round. The host wanted her specifically for the VIP section. His tone suggested this wasn't a request. Natalie adjusted the too tight collar of her server's uniform and nodded. The Metropolitan Club was hosting some kind of private function, the kind where the guest list was shorter than the security detail. And every conversation happened in carefully modulated whispers. She'd been working events like this for 6 months, ever since her day job at the accounting firm cut her hours. Her evening gig at the coffee shop couldn't cover the gap. The money was good. The clients were tolerable, and most importantly, nobody asked questions about who she was or where she was going. In a city of 8 million people, invisibility was its own kind of currency. She navigated through the crowd with practiced efficiency. Her tray balanced perfectly, as she wove between clusters of men in suits that cost more than her annual rent. The Metropolitan Club dripped old money, with its crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and oil paintings of men who'd been dead for centuries. It was the kind of place that made her acutely aware of every scuff on her shoes, every thread coming loose from her uniform. But it was also the kind of place where tips could cover a month of groceries in a single night. Table 12 sat in the corner, partially obscured by an ornate column. As Natalie approached, she noticed the men there first. They were broad-shouldered, watchful, with the kind of stillness that came from professional violence. They were security, though not the legitimate kind. Their eyes tracked her movement with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then she saw him. He sat at the center of the table like a king holding court. Though his posture suggested he didn't need a throne to command authority, he had dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that were simultaneously warm, amber, and cold calculation. He was younger than she expected, maybe in his early 30s, but he carried himself with the weight of someone who'd seen more than most people experienced in a lifetime. When his gaze lifted to meet hers, the room seemed to contract. Natalie announced their drinks, her voice steady despite the sudden hammer of her pulse. She set down the glasses with careful precision. There was whiskey neat, vodka on the rocks, and something expensive and amber that she couldn't pronounce. She asked if she could get them anything else. He asked for her name. The request came from him, delivered in a voice like smoke and expensive bourbon. It wasn't loud, but every man at the table stopped talking. The response, Natalie, left her mouth before she could consider if giving her real name was wise. He repeated her name, Natalie, like he was testing the weight of it, seeing how it felt. Then he told her his name was Adrian. She should have walked away. She should have offered a polite smile, collected her tip, and disappeared back into the anonymity of the serving staff. But something in his expression held her there. It wasn't a threat exactly, but a kind of magnetic gravity that made leaving feel impossible. She asked if there was anything else he needed. He told her to just call him Adrian. He leaned back in his chair, still watching her with that unsettling focus. He said that yes, he needed her to tell him something. He asked what someone like her dreams about. The question landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward into territory that had nothing to do with drink orders or professional service. Natalie felt her cheeks warm, felt the attention of every man at the table shift to her like searchlights. She tried for a light tone, saying she dreamed about getting off her shift before her feet fell off. Adrian's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. He called her a liar. The word should have been an insult. Instead, it felt like an invitation. Natalie managed to say that she should get back to work. As she stepped away, his voice followed her, stating with certainty that he would see her again, Natalie. It wasn't a question. The rest of the night passed in a blur of drink orders and careful navigation through rooms full of people who existed in a different stratosphere of wealth and power. But Natalie couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time she circled back through the main hall, she felt Adrian's gaze find her, track her, and hold her in place, even when she was 20 feet away. It should have been unnerving. Instead, it felt like standing in sunlight after months in shadow. By the time the event wound down, Natalie's feet were screaming, and her lower back had developed a permanent ache. She collected her tips, which were better than expected. She was counting them in the service corridor when Marcus appeared. He told her the VIP wanted to see her. Natalie's stomach dropped. She asked which one. He said it was the one who owned the building. Marcus's expression was carefully neutral, but she caught the warning in his eyes. He told her not to keep him waiting. She should have refused. She should have claimed exhaustion, or another commitment, or any of the dozens of excuses that would have gotten her out of whatever this was. But curiosity, or maybe something more dangerous, propelled her forward. The private suite was on the top floor, accessible only by a key-coded elevator that Marcus operated himself before leaving her alone in ascending silence. When the doors opened, Natalie stepped into a space that redefined luxury. There were floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, furniture that looked like art installations, and Adrian standing by the bar with 2 glasses already poured. He said that she came. She replied that he asked. Natalie stayed near the elevator, her exit strategy firmly in mind. She asked what he needed to talk about without an audience. He crossed to her, moving with a kind of controlled grace that suggested violence was always an option, but rarely necessary. Up close, he was even more devastating. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back, with features that were too sharp to be conventionally handsome, but somehow more compelling for it. He stated that she was afraid of him. It wasn't a question, but Natalie answered anyway, asking if she should be. He said probably. His honesty was startling, but he'd rather she wasn't. He offered her one of the glasses, something that smelled expensive and faintly of caramel. Natalie took it but didn't drink, her mind running through every true crime podcast she'd ever ignored the warnings from. She quietly asked what he wanted. He wanted to know her. Adrian's gaze held hers unblinking. He wanted to understand what makes someone work 3 jobs and still show up with kindness for strangers who don't deserve it. She asked how he knew about her other jobs. He simply said he asked. It was simple, direct, and terrifying. He explained that she worked at Morrison & Associates during the day, the Blue Line Cafe in the evenings, and events like tonight on weekends, that she was finishing a business degree online, that she'd lived in the same apartment for 2 years. He even knew she sent money to her mother in Pennsylvania every month, and hadn't taken a vacation since she moved to New York. Natalie set the glass down carefully, fighting the urge to run. She called it invasive. He agreed, saying he knew. Adrian moved to the windows wing, giving her space. He said he wanted to make sure she was real. She asked, as opposed to what? He said as opposed to another beautiful face working an angle. He glanced back at her, and something in his expression shifted. Maybe it was vulnerability or exhaustion. He explained that in his world, everyone wants something. Usually power, sometimes money, occasionally revenge. He paused, then said, "But you looked at me like I was just a man who needed a drink refilled." She told him that he was just a man who needed a drink refilled. He replied, "No, Natalie, I'm really not." The weight behind those words settled into the space between them like smoke. Natalie should have pressed the elevator button. Should have walked away from whatever this was before it consumed her. But instead, she heard herself ask who he was. He was someone who makes problems disappear. One people fear and respect in equal measure. Someone who spent the last 10 years building an empire that runs on loyalty and blood. His voice was steady, matter of fact. He said he was someone who saw her and thought, for the first time in a decade, that maybe there was something worth wanting, besides power. Natalie's breath caught. The smart thing would be to leave. The safe thing would be to forget this conversation, this man, this moment. But something in his confession resonated with the loneliness she'd been carrying. For so long she'd forgotten it had a name. She finally said she'd have 1 drink, then go home. Adrian's smile was slow and genuine. 1 drink. 1 drink became 2. Two became a conversation that spiraled into territory Natalie had never expected: philosophy and ambition, fear and hope, the strange mathematics of surviving in a city that consumed people like kindling. Adrian spoke with the careful precision of someone who weighed every word, but beneath it was a hunger that matched her own. Not for things or status, but for connection, for being seen. At some point past midnight, Natalie said that he didn't talk like a criminal as the Manhattan skyline glittered beyond the windows. He asked what criminals talk like. She admitted she didn't know, maybe more threatening. He said the truly dangerous ones don't need to threaten. Adrian refilled her glass. She'd switched to water an hour ago, but he was still working on the same whiskey. He continued that they simply are. People feel it and adjust accordingly. She asked if that was what he was, truly dangerous. He studied her for a long moment, his amber eyes unreadable. He said yes, but not to her. She asked how he could be sure. He replied that hurting her would be like destroying art. Pointless and tragic. The words landed in her chest like a physical thing, warm and terrifying. Natalie stood suddenly, needing distance, needing air. She said she should go. He said one word: stay. It was not a command, but a request. And the vulnerability in it undid something in Natalie's carefully constructed defenses. She asked why. He said that in his entire life he'd never met anyone who looked at him the way she did, like he might actually be human. Adrian moved closer, but didn't touch her. She should have left. He pleaded with her to stay. She should have run. Should have done any of the 1,000 smart things that would have kept her safe. Instead, she stayed. The night unfurled like a dream. Conversation bled into confession. Confession into a connection that felt electric and inevitable. When Adrian finally kissed her, it was with the gentleness of someone handling something precious. When she kissed him back, it was with 6 months of loneliness and exhaustion finally finding release. He asked against her mouth if she was sure, giving her every opportunity to retreat. Natalie admitted she wasn't, but that she didn't want to leave. He told her to stay, and she did. Morning arrived with cruel brightness, sunlight streaming through windows Natalie didn't recognize. For a moment, she simply existed in the warmth of the bed, the unfamiliar weight of Adrian's arm across her waist, the quiet peace of being held. Then, reality crashed down like a building collapse. She'd slept with a stranger, a powerful, dangerous stranger who'd investigated her life and admitted to making problems disappear. What did that mean? What had she done? Natalie extracted herself carefully, gathering her clothes with hands that shook. She was halfway dressed when Adrian's voice stopped her. He was awake, watching her with those two sharp eyes, asking if she was leaving without saying goodbye. In the morning light, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. But Natalie had seen enough of the world to know that vulnerability could be a performance. She said she had work, which was true. He thanked her for last night. She insisted she really had to go. She was out the door before he could stop her, running for the elevator like the floor was on fire. Her phone showed 6 missed calls from Marcus and a text that made her stomach drop. It said they needed to talk, that it was important. Conversation happened in Marcus's office, a cramped space that smelled of coffee and desperation. He looked at her with something between pity and fear. Marcus asked her carefully if she knew who the man was she was with last night. She said his name was Adrian, her voice feeling distant, disconnected. She added that he said he makes problems disappear. Marcus told her he's Adrian Caruso, as in the Caruso family, as in the Mafia. The word landed like a gunshot. Natalie felt the blood drain from her face. She felt the room tilt sideways. She asked, what? He told her that he's not just connected, that he runs it. Half the city pays him protection money. The other half is too afraid to admit he exists. Marcus leaned forward, urgently asking what she told him. She said nothing, then everything. She didn't know. Natalie couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She just said, oh my God. He told her she needed to stay away from him, far away. That these people don't just break hearts. They break bones. They make examples. Marcus's expression was grim. He made her promise she'd stay away. Natalie nodded mechanically, her mind racing. A mafia boss. She'd slept with a mafia boss. She had trusted him, had believed for one perfect night that she might have found something real. How could she have been so stupid? The next 2 weeks passed in a haze of paranoia and regret. Natalie changed her route to work, stopped going to familiar places, and avoided anywhere Adrian might think to look for her. Her phone buzzed constantly with unknown numbers that she never answered. Flowers arrived at her apartment with no card. Once she saw a black car idling outside her building and spent 3 hours hiding in a neighbor's apartment until it left. She told herself she was being careful, practical, smart. She didn't admit, even to herself, that she was also heartbroken. Work became her refuge. The mindless routine of coffee orders and accounting spreadsheets was a welcome distraction from the thoughts that ambushed her in quiet moments. She was good at compartmentalizing, at shoving down feelings until they fossilized into something manageable. But some things refused to be ignored. It started with an exhaustion that no amount of sleep could touch. Then came nausea that made her morning coffee routine impossible. When her period was a week late, she told herself it was stress. When it was 2 weeks late, she bought a pregnancy test with cash in a pharmacy 3 neighborhoods away from her apartment. The 2 pink lines appeared before she'd even finished peeing. Natalie sat on the bathroom floor of her apartment, staring at the test in her shaking hands. This wasn't possible. They'd used protection. They'd been careful. Except they hadn't been. Not really. Because she'd trusted him. Because it had felt safe. Because for one perfect night, she'd forgotten that safety was an illusion, and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was pregnant with a mafia boss's baby. The laugh that escaped her throat was more of a sob than humor. The first decision was easy. She was keeping the baby. Natalie had never been particularly maternal, had never planned for children this early, but the moment she saw those pink lines, something fierce and protective unfurled in her chest. This was hers. This life growing inside her was hers to protect. The second decision was harder. She couldn't tell Adrian. Men like him didn't do family. They did control. He'd already proven he could find out everything about her life with a few phone calls. What would he do with this information? Maybe take the baby, use it to bind her to him, or make her disappear to protect his reputation. Natalie spent 3 days researching what happened to women who got involved with organized crime families. The stories she found were uniformly terrible. Threats, manipulation, children used as leverage, women who tried to leave and vanished, women who stayed and wished they'd vanished. She would not be one of those women. The plan formed in pieces, assembled from panic and determination. She would move apartments, change her phone number, quit the event job, and tell her other employers she was relocating for family reasons. She would disappear into the city's 8 million anonymous faces and raise this baby alone. It wasn't a good plan, but it was better than the alternative. Finding a new apartment on her salary proved nearly impossible. Everything affordable was a shoebox or a health hazard, and anything livable required 3 months' rent up front that she didn't have. Natalie finally settled on a 4th-floor walk-up in Queens. It was a place with water stains on the ceiling and neighbors who played salsa music at volumes that violated the Geneva Convention. But it was hers, and more importantly, it wasn't connected to Adrian. Changing her phone number was easier. A new SIM card and a promise to herself that she'd only give the number to people who absolutely needed it. She blocked Adrian's number on her old phone before disposing of it in a dumpster 6 blocks from her new apartment, trying not to think about the messages she'd never read. Quitting the Metropolitan Club required a conversation with Marcus that she'd been dreading. He asked if she was leaving and looked genuinely distressed. He thought she might be overreacting about the Caruso thing and said that Adrian hadn't caused any problems. In fact, he'd been asking about her constantly, and Marcus kept telling him she requested a schedule change. Natalie lied, saying it wasn't about him, she just needed a change. He asked if everything was okay, that she looked. She cut him off, saying she was fine, just tired. Another lie, but Marcus seemed to accept it. The hardest part was the loneliness. Natalie had never been particularly social. Her work schedule made friendships difficult, and most of her college classmates had scattered after graduation. But actively isolating herself, cutting ties with anyone who might lead Adrian back to her, felt like voluntary imprisonment. She attended her prenatal appointments alone, filled out intake forms with her new address and phone number, and tried not to think about how Adrian had looked in the morning light, younger, vulnerable, almost hopeful. It didn't matter what he looked like. What mattered was keeping this baby safe. By her second trimester, Natalie had settled into a new routine. Work at Morrison and Associates during the day, online classes in the evening, prenatal vitamins, and doctor's appointments on weekends. She'd picked up a weekend shift at a small grocery store to replace the Metropolitan Club income. Between that and her accounting work, she was just barely making rent. The pregnancy itself was progressing normally, if exhaustingly. Her doctor assured her that the nausea would pass, that the fatigue was temporary, and that everything was developing as it should. Natalie tried to find comfort in the clinical certainty, tried not to think about how terrified she was. She was going to be a mother, a single mother in New York City, with a business degree she'd never get to use, and a secret that could destroy her life if it ever came to light. Some nights, alone in her apartment with her hand on her growing belly, Natalie let herself wonder what would have happened if Adrian had been anyone else. If he'd been an accountant or a teacher or a bartender, someone safe, someone normal, would she have stayed? Would they have built something together? But he wasn't anyone else. He was a criminal, and she was carrying his child, and those two facts existed in permanent, irreconcilable conflict, so she pushed the wandering thoughts aside and focused on survival. The pregnancy started showing around 4 months, a gentle swell that she could hide under loose sweaters but couldn't ignore. Her co-workers at Morrison & Associates noticed, but were too polite to comment directly, though she caught the looks, the whispered conversations that died when she entered a room. Let them wonder. Let them gossip. As long as they didn't ask questions, she could maintain the fiction of normalcy. The grocery store was less subtle. Her manager, a perpetually exhausted woman named Rita, cornered her during a shift break. Rita asked if she was doing okay, nodding toward Natalie's stomach. She asked if she had support, family. Natalie said she was managing. Rita told her that's not what she asked. Natalie appreciated the directness, even as it made her want to cry. She said the father isn't in the picture. Her mom's in Pennsylvania, but they're not close. She was handling it. Rita studied her with the kind of maternal concern that made Natalie's defenses crack. She offered help, anything she needed. Time off for appointments, someone to cover a shift. She told Natalie to just let her know. Natalie just said okay. The word came out smaller than she intended. That small kindness, offered without judgment or expectation, carried her through the next month. When morning sickness made her shift at Morrison unbearable, Rita adjusted her grocery store schedule. When a prenatal appointment ran long, her supervisor at the accounting firm looked the other way. Natalie was surviving, barely, exhaustingly, but surviving, until the eviction notice arrived. It came on a Tuesday, slipped under her door in an official-looking envelope that made her stomach drop before she even opened it. The landlord was selling the building. All tenants had 60 days to vacate. No exceptions. Natalie read the letter 3 times, hoping the words would change. They didn't. She had 60 days to find a new apartment, while pregnant, while working 2 jobs, while trying to save enough for the hospital bills that were approaching like a freight train. She spent that entire evening searching rental listings. Her growing panic was matched only by her dwindling bank account. Everything in her price range was either too far from work or structurally unsound. Anything better required deposits she didn't have and background checks she couldn't risk. By midnight, she was crying on her bathroom floor, one hand pressed to her belly where the baby had started kicking, gentle flutters that felt like questions she couldn't answer. She whispered to the life inside her that she didn't know what to do, how to fix this. The baby kicked again, oblivious to the impossible situation they were both trapped in. The next 4 weeks were a masterclass in desperation. Natalie worked every shift available, picked up extra hours, and skipped meals to save money. She filled out apartment applications in bathroom stalls. During breaks, lied on intake forms about her employment history, and tried not to think about what would happen if she couldn't find a place in time. Homelessness. That was what would happen. Homelessness while pregnant in New York in winter. The thought kept her awake most nights, staring at water stains on the ceiling and doing math that never quite added up. She needed first month's rent, last month's rent, a security deposit, and enough left over for food and medical bills. The numbers refused to cooperate. By week 6, Natalie had been rejected by 14 different landlords. Too many jobs suggested instability, not enough income history, no cosigner. Pregnant applicants were a liability. She stopped eating lunch to save money, wore the same 3 outfits to work because she couldn't afford laundry. She started walking the 4 miles between her apartment and Morrison & Associates to save on subway fare. Her body, already taxed by pregnancy, began to fail. She was dizzy constantly. Her hands shook, and the darkness around her eyes made her look like she'd been in a fight. Rita noticed first. She told Natalie she needed to eat, that she didn't care what her situation was. Natalie insisted she was fine. Rita's voice was sharp, telling her she was running herself into the ground and that the baby she was carrying deserved better. The words hit like a slap. True and terrible. Natalie opened her mouth to argue, to defend herself, to maintain the pretense that she had everything under control. And then her vision went dark around the edges. She woke up on the break room floor, Rita's concerned face hovering above her. Rita told her she passed out and that she was calling an ambulance. Natalie immediately panicked, saying no ambulance, she couldn't afford it. Rita said then she was going to the clinic down the street, and she was going with her. There was no room for argument. The clinic visit revealed what Natalie had been trying to ignore. She was severely dehydrated, anemic, and undernourished. The doctor, a tired woman with kind eyes, asked careful questions about her living situation, her support system, her ability to care for herself. Natalie lied through most of it. Yes, she had family nearby. Yes, she was eating regularly. Yes, she had stable housing. The doctor didn't believe her, but prescribed iron supplements and prenatal vitamins anyway, along with strict instructions to rest and eat properly. Rest, eat properly. The instructions might as well have been to sprout wings and fly. Rita drove her home in silence. She pulled up outside the building where the for sale sign now dominated the front yard. Rita stated that she was being evicted. It wasn't a question. Natalie nodded, too tired to lie. And the father? Not an option. Rita was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she had a cousin in Brooklyn who rents rooms cheap under the table. She asked if Natalie wanted her to call her. The relief was so sudden, so overwhelming, that Natalie started crying right there in the passenger seat. She said, "Yes, please." Rita's voice was gentle. She told Natalie she needed to take care of herself, that the baby can't grow if she's running on empty. Natalie said she knew. She just didn't know how to do this. Rita told her nobody does, but she can't do it alone. The problem was, alone was all Natalie had. But Rita's cousin fell through. The room was already rented by the time Natalie called, and Brooklyn might as well have been Mars for all the good it did her. Back to the rental listings, back to the rejections, back to the mathematics of impossible choices. She was down to 2 weeks before eviction when she finally broke. It happened at Morrison and Associates during a shift when the building was mostly empty. Natalie had been working through lunch, had been working through most meals lately, and the combination of hunger, exhaustion, and mounting panic finally overwhelmed her defenses. She made it to the bathroom before the sobs started, locking herself in a stall and sliding down the wall until she was sitting on the cold tile floor. Her hands found her belly, now round and undeniable, and the baby kicked against her palms like it was trying to comfort her. She whispered that she was so sorry. She was trying, she promised she was trying. But trying wasn't enough. Trying didn't pay rent or find apartments or make food magically appear. Trying was just another word for failing slowly. She didn't hear the bathroom door open, didn't hear the footsteps, didn't realize she wasn't alone until a shadow fell across the stall door and a voice she'd spent 6 months trying to forget spoke her name. Natalie, her head snapped up, heart hammering. Through the gap at the bottom of the stall, she could see expensive shoes, designer, the kind Adrian wore. She breathed, "No, no, no." He told her to open the door. Steady, but there was something underneath it. Worry, maybe, or anger. She told him to please go away. He said he'd been looking for her for 6 months, that he wasn't going anywhere. Natalie's hand shook as she reached for the lock. What choice did she have? He'd found her. After all her precautions, all her careful planning, he'd found her anyway. The lock clicked, the door swung open, and Adrian Caruso, the most dangerous man in New York, looked down at her pregnant belly with an expression of absolute shock. He said softly, "Oh my God." Then sharper, he asked if it was his. Natalie could have lied. She should have lied. But she was so tired of lying, so tired of running, so tired of carrying this alone, she whispered, "Yes." The word hung between them like a detonation. Adrian didn't move, didn't speak. For a long moment, he simply stared at her belly, with an expression Natalie couldn't decipher, shock come bleeding into something darker, something that made her instinctively curl her arms around herself. Then his jaw tightened, and when he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. He asked how long she'd known. She whispered it was 6 weeks after she left. He repeated the words, 6 weeks, like they were foreign, incomprehensible. He said she'd known for 5 months that she was carrying his child, and she said nothing. She tried to say she couldn't. His voice cracked through the bathroom like a gunshot. He asked why she couldn't send a message, make a phone call, why she couldn't give him the chance to. He stopped, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He asked if she had any idea what he'd thought, what he'd been imagining for 6 months. Natalie struggled to her feet, using the stall wall for support. Her legs shook, whether from malnutrition or fear, she couldn't tell. She said he investigated her entire life after one conversation. He admitted he made problems disappear. She asked what she was supposed to think would happen if she told him. He asked if she thought he wouldn't take care of her. Adrian's voice rose, then dropped again, forced back under control. He said he would have made sure she had everything she needed. He looked at her properly then, and seemed to register the dark circles under her eyes. The way her clothes hung loose everywhere except her belly, the tremor in her hands. He asked when she last ate. She said that's not. He demanded to know. She said yesterday. Maybe the day before. She couldn't remember. The muscle in his jaw jumped. He accused her of starving herself while pregnant with his child. She said she wasn't starving herself. She was trying to survive. The words came out sharper than intended, propelled by months of fear and exhaustion. She asked if he knew what it cost to be pregnant in this city with no insurance. Did he know what rent is? What it takes to keep 3 jobs while growing a human being inside you? He quietly said no, because she never gave him the chance to find out. The truth of that landed between them, complicated and messy. Natalie sagged against the bathroom wall, suddenly too tired to stand. She said she was protecting them, from him, from his world. She met his eyes, saw the hurt there beneath the anger. She told him she researched him. After Marcus told her who he really was, she found stories about women who got involved with men like him. What happened to them? What happened to their children? Her voice cracked. She couldn't let that be them. He asked what stories, his voice gone dangerously soft. She said women who disappeared. Children used as leverage. Families torn apart because someone wanted revenge or power. He said that those women weren't carrying his child. Adrian moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him. Those children weren't his. He asked if she really thought so little of him that she'd believe he'd let harm come to her, to their baby. She admitted she didn't know what to believe about him. The honesty felt like ripping open a wound. She'd spent one perfect night with a man she thought she knew, and then found out everything was a lie. He said he never lied to her. She countered that he did tell her the truth. He asked if she would have stayed if he had. The question hung in the air, unanswerable. They both knew what the answer was. Natalie pressed her hand to her belly, felt the baby move. She said it didn't matter now. What's done is done, he agreed. He said what's done is done. His voice was firm, decided, and what was going to happen next is she was coming with him now. She said she wasn't going anywhere with him. He said yes, she was, because she was being evicted in 2 weeks. She hadn't eaten in days and nearly passed out on this bathroom floor. He pulled out his phone. He said his driver would be there in 5 minutes. She could walk out with him voluntarily, or he could carry her. It was her choice. The casualness of the threat made Natalie's temper flare. She told him he couldn't just kidnap her. He said he wasn't kidnapping her. He was taking the mother of his child somewhere safe where she could be properly cared for. His expression softened slightly. He pleaded with her to let him help her. She laughed a bitter sound, asking if that's what he called it. He asked what she would call it. Control, ownership, exactly what she was afraid of. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was measured, careful. He said he understood why she was afraid. He understood why she ran. But right now she needed help, whether she wanted to admit it or not. Her health was failing. She had no housing lined up. She was working herself to death trying to do this alone. He paused. He asked her to let him take care of her, both of them, just until she was stable. She asked what happened then. He said then they'd figure out what comes next, together. The word together felt like a trap and a lifeline in equal measure. Natalie wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to her independence, even as it crumbled around her. But she was so tired. And the baby, their baby, deserved better than a mother who was slowly falling apart. She said slowly that if she agreed, she wanted conditions. He told her to name them. She said she wasn't his prisoner, that she could leave whenever she wanted. He agreed. She said he couldn't make decisions about her medical care without consulting her. He said of course, and she said he couldn't. Her voice wavered. He couldn't try to take the baby from her, no matter what happened between them. The hurt that flashed across Adrian's face was genuine. He said he would never, Natalie. He would never do that to her. She wanted to believe him. Desperately, dangerously, she wanted to believe him. She whispered, "Okay." Relief washed over his features. He said, "Okay, come on. Let's get you out of here." He offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Natalie took it. The drive to wherever Adrian was taking her passed in a blur of city lights and exhausted silence. Natalie sat in the back of the town car. It had expensive leather, tinted windows, and the subtle scent of luxury. She tried to process what was happening. She'd spent 6 months running from this man, and now she was voluntarily entering his world. Was this survival or surrender? The baby kicked, and Natalie pressed her hand to the movement. Survival, she told herself. This was survival. The car pulled up to a building in Tribeca, all glass and steel and doormen who didn't ask questions. Adrian guided her through a lobby that looked like a magazine, spread into a private elevator that required a key card. The penthouse, when they arrived, was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. The furniture was both beautiful and comfortable, and the kitchen looked like it had never been used. Adrian said the guest room was this way, leading her down a hallway. It had its own bathroom. There were clothes in the closet that should fit, at least for now. He said they'd get her properly outfitted tomorrow. The room was larger than her entire Queen's apartment had been. The bed looked like a cloud. Natalie's exhaustion suddenly hit her like a physical weight. Adrian gently said she needed to eat something before she slept. He asked what sounded manageable. She didn't know. Toast? Maybe soup. He said he'd have both sent up and told her to sit down before she fell down. She obeyed, sinking onto the bed with a sigh that came from somewhere deep in her bones. Adrian disappeared and returned 10 minutes later with a tray containing toast, chicken soup, orange juice, and a bottle of prenatal vitamins. He told her to eat all of it. She said he was very bossy. He replied she was very stubborn. But there was warmth in his voice, not anger. Natalie ate slowly, her stomach protesting the sudden influx of food after days of near starvation. Adrian sat in a chair by the window, watching her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. He asked quietly why she really ran. She said she told him she was scared. He asked if it was of him specifically, or of what he represented. Natalie considered the question while chewing a piece of toast. She said both, neither. She didn't know. She set down the spoon. She explained that the night with him felt real, like maybe she'd found something she didn't know she was looking for. And then Marcus told her who he was, and she realized she'd been living in a fantasy. He said what they had wasn't a fantasy. She asked if it wasn't. He was a crime boss. He ran an empire built on violence and fear. That wasn't compatible with the life she wanted. He asked what life she wanted. She wanted something normal, safe, maybe boring, but hers. She looked at her belly. A life where her child doesn't grow up afraid. Adrian said firmly that her child won't grow up afraid because he won't let anyone touch them, ever. She said he couldn't promise that. He said yes, he could. He asked if she really knew what he did. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He said he protected people. He solved problems that the police can't or won't handle. He made sure the people under his protection could live their lives without fear of predators. She asked by being a predator himself. He didn't flinch from the accusation. Sometimes, the world isn't clean or simple. Sometimes protecting people requires getting your hands dirty. But everything he does with purpose, with rules. She asked what his rules were. No drugs, no human trafficking, no harming innocents. His voice was like steel. Anyone who violates those rules answers to him personally. Natalie studied him in the lamplight, trying to reconcile the man who'd held her so gently with the criminal kingpin sitting across from her. She asked if he killed people. He said yes. The honesty was somehow more frightening than a lie would have been. He clarified, not often and not anymore. These days he has people for that. He met her eyes and asked if that terrified her. He said it should, but it didn't. Natalie was quiet for a long moment, examining her own reactions. She should be terrified. She should be planning her escape. She should be protecting her child from this man and everything he represented. But instead, she felt safer than she had in months, which was either instinct or insanity. She admitted she didn't know what she felt about him. He said that was fair. He hadn't exactly given her reasons to trust him. Adrian stood, moving to the door. He told her to get some sleep, that they'd talk more in the morning. She said his name, Adrian. He paused, his hand on the doorframe. She quietly thanked him for finding her, even though she didn't want to be found. His smile was small and genuine. He thanked her for staying, even though she didn't want to stay. Then he was gone. And Natalie was alone in a room that cost more than she'd earned in a year, pregnant with the child of a man she barely knew, and couldn't seem to stop trusting. She should have been afraid. Instead, for the first time in months, she slept. Morning arrived with sunlight and the smell of fresh coffee. Natalie woke disoriented, momentarily panicked by the unfamiliar ceiling before the previous night's events crashed back. Adrian, the penthouse, the admission that had changed everything. She found him in the kitchen dressed casually in dark jeans and a Henley, cooking what appeared to be an elaborate breakfast. The domesticity of it was jarring. She said from the doorway that he cooked. He glanced up and smiled. He said he lived alone, so it was learn or starve. He gestured to the table, where plates were already set, and told her to sit, that she needed to eat. She said she wasn't an invalid. He replied that no, but she was malnourished and pregnant. He asked her to humor him. The breakfast was better than anything Natalie had eaten in months. Fluffy omelets, perfectly crisp bacon, toast with real butter, and fresh fruit that actually tasted like fruit. She tried to eat slowly to maintain some dignity, but her body had other ideas. Adrian watched her with something like satisfaction. He said she looked much better. She wiped her mouth with a napkin that probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. She asked what happened now. He said now, they get her to a doctor, a real one, not a free clinic. He pulled out his phone. He had someone on retainer, the best obstetrician in the city. She would see her this afternoon. She told him she couldn't afford it. He said she wasn't paying for it. He was. His tone left no room for argument. This was his child, too. He told her to let him take care of them both. The words were reasonable, but something in Natalie bristled at the assumption of control. She said she needed to call her work and let them know she wouldn't be in. He told her it was already done. He had his assistant call Morrison and the grocery store. He told them she had a family emergency and would be taking a leave of absence. The bristle became outright irritation. She told him he had no right to do that. He agreed he was correct, and he apologized. Adrian set down his coffee cup. He said he was used to solving problems quickly and efficiently, and he didn't consider that she might want to handle those calls herself. The genuine apology took some of the wind from Natalie's sails. She just said she needed some autonomy here, some control over her own life. He said it was understood. He asked what she would like to do today, besides the doctor's appointment. She considered, then said she needed to go back to her apartment and get her things before the landlord disposed of them. He said he'd have movers handle it. She was surprised. He explained she was 6 months pregnant and recently malnourished. She wasn't hauling boxes up and down 4 flights of stairs. He stood, clearing the dishes. He said they could go supervise if she wanted, but she wasn't doing the physical labor. It was hard to argue with logic that was actually protective rather than controlling. She said fine, but she would choose what comes and what stays. He said of course. The apartment in Queens looked even more depressing in daylight. The water stains were more prominent, the sounds of arguing neighbors clearer. Natalie directed the movers, 3 large men who clearly worked for Adrian, and treated her with careful deference. Adrian leaned against the doorframe, watching. He asked if this was where she'd been living. His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the judgment underneath. She said it was what she could afford. He said it was a death trap. The wiring was probably from the 70s. The ceiling looked ready to collapse, and he could hear at least 3 different safety violations from there. She said not all of them had penthouses in Tribeca. He said no, but she should have. He moved into the space, examining it with a critical eye. He said she should have been somewhere safe, somewhere with heat that works and locks that actually secure. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. He apologized, saying he knew this wasn't helpful. She said no, he was right. It was terrible. Natalie sank onto the worn couch, the only piece of furniture she wasn't taking. But terrible was all she could manage. Adrian sat beside her, careful not to crowd her space. He asked if she would tell him what the last 6 months were really like for her. So she did. She told him about the isolation, the constant fear of being found, the juggling of jobs and medical appointments, the missed meals and exhausted nights, the eviction notice that had finally broken her. She laid it all out, not looking for sympathy, but needing him to understand the reality she'd been living. When she finished, Adrian was quiet for a long time. Then, he said he was sorry she went through that alone. He was sorry she felt she had to. She said she didn't see another option. He said he knew, and that was on him. When they met, he didn't think about how his reputation might affect her, how it might make her feel unsafe. He turned to face her fully, like he said he needed her to understand something. He would never hurt her. He would never use their child as leverage or control. Whatever happened between them, whether they figured out how to be together or just learned to co-parent, she and the baby would always be protected, always be safe. He swore it. She asked how he could promise that. He had enemies, people who wanted to hurt him. He said those people know that touching his family means their death. Not quick, not painless, just inevitable. The coldness in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. They also know that he keeps his word, always. So when he promised her that no one would hurt her or their child, she should believe it. Natalie wanted to. Desperately, she wanted to believe that this man could keep her safe. That loving him, because she was beginning to suspect that's what this dangerous feeling in her chest was, wouldn't destroy her. She said quietly that she was trying to trust him. He said that was all he could ask. The doctor's appointment that afternoon was a revelation. Dr. Sarah Chen was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach that Natalie appreciated immediately. The office was pristine, the equipment state-of-the-art, and the staff treated her like a person rather than a problem to be processed. Dr. Chen said, "Let's see how the baby is doing," squeezing gel onto Natalie's belly for the ultrasound. Adrian stood beside the examination table, his hand finding Natalie's without conscious thought. She should have pulled away, maintained boundaries. Instead, she held on. The ultrasound screen flickered to life, and there, impossibly, miraculously, was their baby. He was fully formed now with tiny fingers and a face that looked almost human. Dr. Chen said everything looked good, moving the wand to get different angles. Growth was right on track. The heart was strong. She was measuring at about 26 weeks. Adrian's voice was rough. He asked if she could tell the gender. Dr. Chen smiled and asked if they would like to know. They both nodded. It was a boy. The words landed in the space between them, transforming an abstract concept into concrete reality. A son. They were having a son. Natalie looked at Adrian and saw tears tracking down his face, silent, unchecked, genuine. The sight of this powerful, dangerous man crying over an ultrasound image did something to her carefully maintained defenses. Adrian whispered, "A boy? We're having a boy." Natalie managed to say, "Yeah, we are." After the appointment, Adrian insisted on taking her to lunch at a restaurant that required reservations made months in advance. The host took one look at him and found a table immediately. Natalie asked if people always jumped when he walked in, scanning the menu that had no prices listed. He said, "Usually." She said it must be nice. He said it was useful, but nice was something different. He set down his menu. He wanted to ask her something, and he needed her to be honest. Natalie's stomach tightened. She said okay. He asked what she wanted from him, not what she thought she should want, or what would be easiest, what she actually wanted. It was a dangerous question, one that required dangerous honesty. Natalie took a sip of water, buying time to organize her thoughts. She wanted their son to be safe, to grow up without fear. He said that was what she wanted for him. What about for herself? She said she didn't know if what she wanted was possible. He told her to tell him anyway. She met his eyes across the table and saw genuine curiosity there, genuine care. She said she wanted someone who sees her, who understands that she's not just the mother of his child, but a person with dreams and goals, and a life beyond this situation. Her voice dropped. She wanted someone who makes her feel the way he did that first night, like she mattered, like she wasn't invisible. He told her she'd never been invisible to him, not for a single moment. She admitted that terrified her because he wasn't supposed to be what she wanted. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff. He was everything she should run from. But when she was with him, she felt safer than she'd felt in years. She asked how that was possible. He said maybe because she knew on some level that he meant what he said, that when he promised to protect her, he will. Adrian leaned forward. He knew his world was dangerous. He knew what he was. But he could keep her separate from the worst of it. He could give her the life she wanted, the safety, the stability, the chance to build something of her own. She asked in exchange for what? He said nothing. There was no exchange. She was the mother of his child. That alone meant she got everything he had to offer. She asked what if she wanted more than protection? What if she wanted? She stopped, unable to finish the thought. Adrian's voice was gentle. What if she wanted him? He said then she could have that too, but on her timeline, her terms. He wasn't going anywhere. They had time to figure this out. The waiter arrived with their food, interrupting the moment. They ate in companionable silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Natalie tried to imagine a future where this worked, where she could have Adrian and safety and the normal life she wanted for her son. The pieces didn't quite fit, but maybe that was okay. Maybe life was messier than she'd been giving it credit for. As they finished eating, Adrian said he needed to tell her something, about why he was so desperate to find her. He said okay. He explained that the night they spent together wasn't just physical for him. He knew it might have seemed that way given how fast things moved, but she did something no one else had ever done. He paused, choosing his words carefully. She made him want to be better, to be the man she saw when she looked at him, instead of the man everyone else fears. He asked her to let him finish. When she disappeared, he thought he'd lost his chance at that, at being someone worth knowing. He searched for her because he needed to know if what they had was real, or if he'd imagined the whole thing. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers, and then he found her on that bathroom floor, pregnant and alone, and he realized he'd failed her before he even had the chance to try. He said she ran, because he was exactly what she feared, a monster. She told him he wasn't a monster. He said he was something close enough that she couldn't risk trusting him with the truth about their child. That was on him. All of it. His grip tightened. But he was asking for a chance to prove he could be different, that he could be what she and their son needed. Natalie turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. She said she was scared. He said so was he. She asked of what? He said of failing her again, of being the reason their son grows up without a father. His voice was raw with honesty, of loving her and having her realize she deserved better. The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and true. Natalie squeezed his hand, felt the calluses there, the strength. She thought they were both pretty terrified. He agreed with a sad, genuine smile, but maybe they could be terrified together. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't a promise of forever. But it was honest. And in that moment, honesty was enough. The next few weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm. Natalie lived in the guest room of Adrian's penthouse, maintaining the fiction of boundaries while gradually letting them blur. He was respectful, careful not to push, but his presence was constant. He made sure she ate, accompanied her to medical appointments, and quietly rearranged his life to accommodate hers. She started to see the patterns of his work. The phone calls that came at odd hours, the meetings that happened behind closed doors. Once she woke at 3 a.m. to find him sitting in the living room, blood on his knuckles and exhaustion in his eyes. He'd quietly told her not to ask, so she didn't. She'd brought him ice for his hands and sat with him in the darkness until his breathing steadied. Some truths didn't need words, but mostly, life was surprisingly normal. They watched movies together, argued about baby names, and assembled furniture for the nursery. Adrian insisted on setting up. Natalie enrolled in online classes again, picking up the pieces of the business degree she'd abandoned. Adrian hired a tutor to help her when coursework got overwhelming. She'd said he didn't have to do that. He'd replied with a genuine smile that he wasn't doing it for her. He was doing it for their son. He deserved a mother who achieves her dreams. It was gestures like that, quiet, thoughtful, completely unexpected, that slowly dismantled her defenses. She was falling for him, she realized, not the sanitized version she'd met that first night, but the complicated, dangerous, surprisingly gentle man who made her breakfast and checked her ankles for swelling and read parentings when he thought she wasn't looking, but the realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt inevitable. They were having dinner. Adrian had cooked again, something with pasta and vegetables that actually tasted good. When his phone buzzed, he glanced at it, and his entire demeanor changed. He said he needed to take it, that it was important, and disappeared into his office. Natalie continued eating, trying not to eavesdrop, but his voice carried through the door, sharp, angry, commanding. When he emerged 20 minutes later, his face was like stone. She asked what was wrong. He said it was nothing she needed to worry about. She pressed him. He said it was handled, but his jaw was tight, his hands clenched. She said if it affected her or the baby, she had a right to know. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he explained that someone made a move against one of his operations, tried to use it as leverage to renegotiate their arrangement, and he reminded them why that was a bad idea. His voice was flat, emotionless. They won't make that mistake again. Natalie couldn't finish the question about what he did. He said no, he didn't kill anyone, but he made his point clearly enough that he won't need to. He moved to the window, looking out over the city. He told her this was his life. Problems and solutions, threats and responses. It's not clean. She said she wasn't asking for clean, she was asking for honest. He turned to face her, then here was the honest truth. There were people who would hurt her to get to him, people who saw her and their son as leverage, as a weakness, and every single one of them knew that touching her meant death. He had made that very, very clear. She asked if he really wanted details. She considered, then said no, but she wanted to know what would happen if someone came for them. He replied without hesitation or remorse that they would die slowly. And everyone they've ever cared about would learn what happens when you threaten Adrian Caruso's family. The casual brutality of it should have sent her running. Instead, Natalie felt something else, a primal satisfaction that this man, this dangerous, powerful man, would burn the world down to keep them safe. She said okay quietly. She trusted him to protect them. She didn't need to know how. The relief on his face was palpable. He thanked her. That night, as Natalie lay in bed, feeling the baby move, she thought about trust and fear and the complicated calculus of loving someone dangerous. She'd spent 6 months running from Adrian, convinced that his world would destroy her. But maybe destruction was just change by another name. Maybe being with him meant letting go of who she thought she needed to be and accepting who she actually was. Someone brave enough to love a monster. Someone strong enough to build a family from fear. Someone willing to trust that safety and danger could coexist. That love could bloom in unexpected soil. That happy endings weren't always simple or clean. She fell asleep with her hand on her belly, and Adrian's promise echoing in her mind. They won't touch you, ever. And for the first time since seeing those 2 pink lines, Natalie believed in something beyond survival. She believed in them. The nightmare came 3 weeks later in the form of a black sedan parked outside Dr. Chenin's office. Natalie didn't notice it at first. She was too focused on the fact that she had just seen their son's face in a 3D ultrasound. She'd watched him yawn and stretch in her womb and heard Dr. Chen declare everything perfect. Adrian walked beside her, his hand at the small of her back, discussing nursery paint colors with an intensity that would have been funny if it wasn't so endearing. Then she saw his expression change. It happened in an instant. The warmth drained from his face. His posture shifted from relaxed to predatory. His hand moved from her back to her arm, his grip firm, but not painful. He quietly told her to get in the car. Now. She asked what was wrong. He said not to look, just walk. He guided her toward his town car, which had pulled up to the curb with suspicious timing. He told Marcus to take her home, direct route, no stops. She said he was scaring her. He opened the car door and helped her inside with hands that were gentle despite the urgency. He promised her she was safe. But he needed to handle something, and he needed her gone before he did. She asked what he had to handle, but he was already closing the door, already turning toward the black sedan with a walk that promised violence. Natalie twisted in her seat, watching through the rear window as Adrian approached the other car. 2 men got out, most big, dangerous looking, the kind who made their living through intimidation. Marcus said from the driver's seat that they needed to go. She asked what was happening. He said Mr. Caruso would explain when he got home. Right now, his job was to get her to safety. The car pulled away before Natalie could protest. She watched through the window until Adrian and the 2 men disappeared from view, her heart hammering against her ribs. The baby kicked, responding to her elevated pulse, and she pressed her hand to the movement. She whispered that it was okay, that his father knew what he was doing. She hoped that was true. The penthouse felt like a cage when they arrived. Marcus escorted her inside, then positioned himself by the elevator, with the kind of alertness that suggested he was expecting trouble. Natalie paced the living room, her phone clutched in one hand, willing it to ring. It took 2 hours. When Adrian finally walked through the door, his knuckles were split, and there was blood on his shirt that she was fairly certain wasn't his. But he was whole, and the relief that flooded through her was so intense it made her knees weak. She demanded to know what happened. He told her to sit down. He moved to the bar, poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, and downed it in one swallow. He said it was a message. From who? The Vulov family. A Russian outfit out of Brighton Beach. He poured another drink, but didn't touch it. They'd been pushing into his territory for months. Today, they decided to make a point by showing up where she was vulnerable. The words landed like ice water. They were there for her. He said not to hurt her, but to show him they could reach her if they wanted to. His jaw was tight with barely controlled rage. It was a mistake they won't make twice. She asked what he did, what he had to do. He met her eyes and she saw the violence there, the cold calculation. He made it very clear that she and their son were off limits, that even looking at her wrong would be considered an act of war. He said they'll accept that once they find what he left for them. His voice was flat, emotionless. He was sorry she had to see him like that. But they needed to understand the consequences. Natalie should have been horrified. She should have been planning her escape. Instead, she moved to him, took the glass from his hand, and set it aside. She asked if they were safe. He said yes. She asked if he was sure. He was sure. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a gentleness that contradicted everything else about him. He swore he wouldn't let anyone touch her. She believed him. That was the terrifying part. She absolutely believed him. But belief didn't stop the fear that crept in later when she was alone in the guest room with her thoughts. The Vulovs had found her at the doctor's office, which meant they'd been watching, gathering information, waiting for an opportunity. How many other people knew where she was? How many other families might see her as leverage? Sleep came fitfully, plagued by dreams of black sedans and men with cold eyes. She woke before dawn, sweat-soaked and shaking, to find Adrian sitting in the chair by her window. She asked how long he'd been there. A few hours. He said she was having nightmares. He moved to the bed, sat on the edge, and asked if she wanted to talk about it. She said not really. He said okay. He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. He was increasing security. Marcus would be with her whenever she left the penthouse. He was also having the building systems upgraded. Better cameras, better locks, better everything. She asked if it would be enough. He said grimly that it had to be. He couldn't lose her, either of her. The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Natalie reached for his hand, laced their fingers together. She said she was scared. He said he knew. So was he. She asked what he was afraid of. He was afraid he'd dragged her into a war she didn't sign up for, that loving him would get her killed. He squeezed her hand, that their son would grow up without a mother, because he wasn't careful enough. She told him he couldn't think like that. He asked how he couldn't. She was right to run from him, right to be afraid. His world was dangerous, and now she was in it whether she chose to be or not. She sat up, ignoring her body's protest. She told him to help her understand it, to stop trying to protect her from the truth and just tell her what they were dealing with.
Adrian was quiet for a long time.
Then he started talking. He told her about the structure of his organization, the families that operated in New York, the delicate balance of power that kept the city from descending into outright war. He explained about territories and tribute, about the rules that governed their world, and the consequences for breaking them. He was honest about the violence, about the people who died by his order, about the blood on his hands that no amount of washing would ever clean. He said the Volkovs were new. They came over 5 years ago, started small, grew ambitious. They don't respect the old rules, don't understand the ecosystem they've built. They see weakness where there's actually strength through cooperation. And they think she was his weakness. He said they were right. She was. He met her eyes. She and their son were the only weakness he had, which made her the most dangerous thing in his life, and the most precious. He asked if she understood what that meant. She said it meant he'd do anything to protect them. He said he'd burn down the entire city if that's what it took. No hesitation. No doubt. The Vulovs miscalculated today. They thought showing they could reach her would make him negotiate. Instead, it made him realize he needed to eliminate them completely. The casual way he discussed elimination made Natalie's stomach tighten. She asked what that meant. It meant war. Real war, not the posturing they'd been doing. He stood, moved to the window. He'd been trying to avoid it, trying to find a peaceful solution. But they crossed a line today. They threatened her, and that changed everything. She told him she didn't want him to start a war because of her. He said it wasn't because of her. It was because they were a cancer that needed to be cut out before it spread. He turned back to her. But he told her to make no mistake. She was the catalyst. She and their son. They were what finally made him willing to do what needed to be done. The weight of that responsibility settled over Natalie like a shroud. She asked how long the war would take. Weeks? maybe a month if they were stubborn. His voice was clinical, detached. He had more resources, more loyalty, better positioning. They would fall. It was just a matter of how much damage they did on the way down. She asked what about in the meantime. In the meantime, she would stay here, safe, protected. He came back to the bed, knelt beside it so they were eye level. He knew she hated feeling caged. He knew this wasn't the life she wanted, but he needed her to trust him, just for a little while longer. Natalie looked at him. This man who turned her world upside down, who made her feel safe and terrified in equal measure, who was willing to wage war to protect their unborn child. She said she trusted him, but she needed something from him, too. He told her to name it. She said when this was over, when the Volkovs were gone and things were stable, she wanted him to step back. Not from her or the baby, but from the worst of it. The violence, the constant danger. She took his hand, placed it on her belly where their son was moving. She needed to know that their son won't grow up watching his father become a monster. He said he was already a monster. She said no. He was a man who does monstrous things when necessary. That was different. She covered his hand with hers. She asked him to promise her he'd try, that he'd at least consider building something legitimate, something their son could be proud of. Adrian was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then he promised. When this was over, he'd start transitioning to legitimate business. It won't be fast and it won't be clean, but he'd do it. She said thank you. He leaned forward, pressed his forehead against hers. He told her he loved her. He should have said it before, but he was saying it now. He loved her, Natalie Brooks, completely, terrifyingly, forever. The words should have felt too soon, too intense. Instead, they felt inevitable. She said she loved him too, which was either the smartest or stupidest thing she'd ever admitted. He said probably both. His smile was genuine, warm. He told her to come back to bed, that she needed rest. She asked if he would stay. He said as long as she wanted him to. So he climbed into bed beside her, fully clothed, and held her while she drifted back to sleep. And for a few hours, the world outside didn't matter. There was just the two of them, and the life growing between them, building something fragile and precious in the darkness. The war with the Vulovs started 2 days later. Natalie didn't witness it directly. Adrian made sure she was insulated from the worst of it, but she felt its effects. The penthouse became a fortress. Security doubled and then tripled. Adrian left for meetings that lasted hours, and came back with exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Phone calls happened at all hours, always in Russian or Italian or other languages she didn't understand, always with an urgency that made her chest tighten. One night, she asked how bad it was, finding him in his office at 3 a.m. He said they were winning. He didn't look up from the document spread across his desk. 2 of their warehouses were gone, their supply lines were disrupted, and 3 of their captains had defected to his side. She asked about casualties. He said there were some, his voice carefully neutral, none that mattered. She said she didn't mean it like that. He rubbed his eyes, suddenly looking every one of his 33 years. He meant none of his people. They'd been surgical, precise. The Vulovs were bleeding fighters while they were gaining ground. Natalie moved behind him and started massaging the tension from his shoulders. She asked when it would end. He said soon. Their leadership was fracturing. Another week, maybe 2, and they'll either surrender or cease to exist. He leaned into her touch. He asked how she was feeling, how the baby was. She said they were fine. Dr. Chen said everything was progressing normally. He said that was good. He caught her hand, pulled her around to face him. He needed her to promise him something. She asked what. He said if something happened to him, if the worst occurred, she would take their son and disappear. He had accounts set up in her name, properties in cities where no one knew him. Marcus had all the information. She'd never have to worry about money or safety. She told him nothing was going to happen to him. He said to promise him anyway. The fear in his voice was genuine, and it terrified her. She promised. But he wasn't going anywhere. He said no, he wasn't, because he had too much to live for. The kiss that followed was desperate, clinging, weighted with all the things they couldn't say. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. He said quietly that when this was over, he was taking her away, somewhere warm and safe, where they could just be together before the baby comes. She said she'd like that. Italy, maybe, or the coast of Spain. Somewhere she could breathe without security watching her every move. She said as long as he was there, she didn't care where they went. His smile was soft, genuine. He told her to come to bed, that she shouldn't be up this late. She said neither should he. He said he'd be there in a few minutes, he just needed to finish reviewing these reports. But Natalie knew he'd be there for hours yet, planning and strategizing and carrying the weight of decisions that would determine who lived and who died. So she kissed Tim once more and left him to his war, trusting that he'd come back to her when he could. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Natalie was reading in the living room, trying to focus on her business text despite the baby's constant gymnastics, when Adrian burst through the door with an expression she'd never seen before. It was triumph mixed with relief. He said it was over. She asked what? The war? He said it was over. Viktor Vulov just called to negotiate surrender. He crossed her, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her hard. They had won. The relief was so sudden, so overwhelming that Natalie started crying. She asked if it was really over. He said it was really over. He was pulling his operations out of New York entirely, relocating to Philadelphia. In exchange, he wouldn't hunt down every member of his family and eliminate them. Adrian was grinning, actually grinning. He said they were safe. She and the baby were safe. She should have been happy, should have felt nothing but relief. Instead, something cold settled in her stomach. She asked what he had to do to make him surrender. The grin faded. He asked if she really wanted to know. She said no. Then yes. Then she didn't know. She pulled back, studying his face. She needed to know what he was capable of, what their son's father was capable of. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he took his brother. Not to kill him. He doesn't hurt innocents. And Dmitry Volf is more of an accountant than a criminal. But he made it very clear that if Viktor didn't stand down, his brother would pay the price for his pride. She said he used him as leverage. He said yes. And if Viktor hadn't surrendered, then he would have done what he had to do. His voice was steady, unflinching. He wouldn't apologize for protecting her. Not ever. She understood the logic, even agreed with it on some level. But the casual way he discussed using human lives as bargaining chips made her realize how different their worlds still were. She'd been raised to believe in rules, in systems, in the sanctity of due process. Adrian's world had no such illusions. She asked where Dmitry was now. He was on a plane back to Philadelphia with his brother, unharmed, well-fed, and with a very clear understanding of what happens if the Volkovs ever returned to New York. He took her hands. He said he kept his word. He protected her without becoming the monster she was afraid he'd be. She said he threatened an innocent man. He said he leveraged a resource to end a war without further bloodshed. It wasn't clean, but it worked. He paused. He asked if she was angry with him. She considered the question honestly. Was she angry, disappointed, relieved? She said she didn't know what she was. She was glad it was over. She was glad they were safe. But she was also scared of how easy this seemed for him. He said it wasn't easy. Nothing about it was easy. His voice was rough. He asked if she thought he enjoyed making these choices. If he slept well at night, knowing the things he'd done. She thought he was very good at compartmentalizing. He said he had to be. If he let himself feel the weight of every decision, every death, every compromise he'd made, he'd drown in it. He released her hands, moved to the window, but he felt it with her, all of it. She made him want to be better, to do better. And that was terrifying, because better doesn't always mean effective. Natalie moved to stand beside him, looking out over the city that had become her prison and her sanctuary. She said she wasn't asking him to be perfect. She was asking him to remember that their son will learn from him, that he'll see how he solves problems and think that's how the world works. He said then he'll teach him to be better than him, to build instead of destroy, to use power to protect instead of control. He looked at her. He meant what he said before. When the transition was complete, he was stepping back, building legitimate businesses, creating something their son could inherit without shame. She asked how long that would take, years, but he would start now, today. He turned to face her fully. He loved her, and he loved the man he was when he was with her. That was worth more than any empire. The declaration was so earnest, so vulnerable, that Natalie felt her remaining defenses crumble. She said she loved him too. Even when he scared her, even when she didn't understand his choices, she loved him. They stood together in the fading afternoon light, holding each other while the city spread out beneath them. Somewhere out there, Viktor Vulov was licking his wounds and planning his retreat. Somewhere, people were celebrating or mourning the war's end. But in the penthouse, there was just the two of them and the promise of something better.
The baby kicked hard, and Adrian laughed, pressing his hand to the movement.
He said with pride that he was strong. She said he was stubborn like his father, or his mother. Adrian knelt, pressing his ear to her belly. He said, "Hey, little one, you're safe now. Your mom and I made sure of it." Watching him talk to their unborn son, Natalie felt something shift inside her. This was real. This family they were building, this life they were creating. It was messy and complicated and probably doomed to be difficult, but it was theirs, and she was done running from it. The reprieve lasted exactly 5 days. Natalie was in the nursery organizing tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small when she heard raised voices from the living room. She moved toward the sound, her body awkward and heavy at 7 months pregnant, and found Adrian arguing with a man she didn't recognize. Adrian was saying that he couldn't be serious, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. The man said he was dead serious. The commission wanted a meeting. They had concerns about how he handled the Vulov situation. The man was older, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had seen too much violence to be surprised by anything. He said Adrian didn't get to refuse. Adrian said he wasn't refusing. He was saying the timing was inconvenient. The man said his personal life didn't change commission protocol. The man's eyes flicked to Natalie, dismissive and cold. He told Adrian to bring her if he was worried about security, but he would attend. Natalie asked whose two he was, moving to stand beside Adrian. Adrian said he was no one important, but his jaw was tight. The man said his name was Antonio Marches. He sat on the commission that oversees organized operations in the Northeast. His smile didn't reach his eyes. He said she must be the reason Caruso went to war. She said she was the mother of his child, and that was all he needed to know. He said she was feisty, that he liked that. Marches turned back to Adrian. "Tomorrow night, the usual place. Don't be late." He left without waiting for a response, and the silence that followed was oppressive. Natalie asked what that was about. He said it was politics. The commission oversees the major families, making sure they're not stepping on each other's toes too much. They were concerned he acted unilaterally against the Vulovs. She asked if he did. He said yes, but he had cause. He ran a hand through his hair. They were going to push back, try to impose some kind of penalty for not consulting them first. It was all posturing. She asked if it was dangerous. He said no. The commission doesn't do violence. They mediate it. This was just bureaucracy with bigger stakes. But something in his tone made Natalie nervous. She asked if she could come with him. He said absolutely not. Commission meetings were no place for civilians. She said she wasn't a civilian, she was his family. She took his hand. If they were discussing him, she wanted to be there. He pleaded with her. She said she was tired of being protected from his world. If they were going to do this, really do this, she needed to see all of it, even the parts he wanted to hide. Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the conflict in his expression, the desire to keep her safe warring with the understanding that she was right. He said okay, but she had to stay close to him. She couldn't speak unless spoken to, and if he said they were leaving, they would leave immediately. He asked if she understood. She did. The meeting was held in a restaurant in Little Italy, closed to the public for the evening. Natalie walked in on Adrian's arm, very aware of the stares that followed them. She dressed carefully, in a maternity dress that was elegant without being flashy, her hair pulled back with minimal jewelry. She wanted to project competence, not vulnerability. The commission consisted of 5 men, all older than Adrian, all carrying themselves with the weight of authority. They sat at a long table like judges at a trial, and the symbolism wasn't lost on Natalie. Antonio Marches gestured to chairs across from them for Caruso and his guest. Adrian held Natalie's chair, his hand lingering on her shoulder for a moment before taking his own seat. He said, "Gentlemen," he understood they had concerns about his recent actions. Another man, heavy-set with a thick Brooklyn accent, said that concerns was putting it mildly. He had gone to war with the Vulovs without commission approval, which violates protocol. Adrian said the Vulovs threatened his family, which supersedes protocol. Marches leaned forward, asking if it really did, because from where they sat, it looked like he used a personal matter as an excuse to eliminate competition. Adrian's voice was calm, reasonable. He said the Volkovs had been pushing into established territories for years. Everyone at this table knew they were a problem that needed addressing. He simply took care of it before it became everyone's problem. The other man asked if he did that by threatening an innocent civilian, Dmitry Vulov, who had no involvement in his brother's operations. Adrian said he was fine, completely unharmed. He used the minimum force necessary to achieve the desired result. The men exchanged looks, a silent conversation happening that Natalie couldn't interpret. Then the heavy-set man spoke again. The commission had discussed the matter. They were imposing a fine of $5 million and requiring him to cede the Brooklyn ports to neutral management. Adrian's voice went hard. Absolutely not. The ports were his. He built that operation from nothing. The man said, then he shouldn't have acted without authorization. Adrian said he acted to protect his family. If the commission had a problem with that, perhaps the commission needed to reconsider its priorities. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Natalie felt her heart hammering, felt the baby responding to her elevated stress. She wanted to reach for Adrian's hand, but didn't dare show weakness in front of these men. Marches said softly that he was walking a dangerous line. The commission's authority exists for a reason. Without it, they had chaos. Adrian said without the ability to protect their families, they had nothing worth fighting for. Adrian stood, and Natalie followed suit. He would pay the fine, but the ports would stay his. If that was unacceptable, the commission could consider him outside its jurisdiction going forward. The threat hung in the air, a declaration of independence that could either be brilliant or suicidal. Natalie held her breath, waiting to see which way the moment would tip. Finally, Marches smiled. It was a cold, calculated expression. The ports could stay his, for now. But he told Caruso to understand that he'd used up his goodwill here. The next time he acted unilaterally, there would be severe consequences. Adrian said it was understood. They left the restaurant in tense silence. Adrian's hand firm on her back as he guided her to the car. Once inside, away from watching eyes, he let out a long breath. He quietly said that was a mistake. She asked what he meant. He said he just declared himself independent of the commission's authority. That made him either incredibly powerful or incredibly vulnerable, depending on how the other families reacted. He looked at her, and there was fear in his eyes. He did it because they wanted to take something that keeps her safe. The ports generate revenue that funds security, operations, everything they need. Without them, he's weaker, and weakness gets people killed. Natalie reached for his hand. Then they'd deal with whatever came together. He said he was pulling her deeper into this world every day, making her complicit in choices that could destroy them both. She said she chose this. She chose him. She squeezed his hand. She told him to stop trying to protect her from the consequences of her own decisions. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. He was terrified he was going to fail her, fail him. She told him then to be the man he promised to be, to build something better. She pulled back to look at him. He said when this was over, he'd start transitioning to legitimate business. She told him to start now, tonight, to show the commission and everyone else that he was moving beyond this life. He said it wasn't that simple. She said nothing about them was simple, but it was worth fighting for. Adrian kissed her then, deep and desperate, pouring all his fear and hope and love into the connection. When they finally pulled apart, his voice was steady with decision. He said okay, they'd do this her way. He would start the transition immediately, shore up their defenses, and build something their son could be proud of. He pressed his hand to her belly. No more wars, no more violence, unless there was no other choice. He was done being the monster. She told him he was never the monster. He was just scared. She covered his hand with hers. Now, be brave. And in the darkness of the car, with the city lights streaming past and their son moving between them, they made a choice to fight for something better, to build instead of destroy. To trust that love could transform even the most dangerous foundations into something worth keeping. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be clean, but it would be theirs, and that was enough. The transition started the next morning with a phone call that lasted 3 hours. Natalie woke to find Adrian's side of the bed empty. She'd stopped sleeping in the guest room 2 weeks ago, though neither of them had explicitly discussed the shift. She found him in his office, surrounded by legal documents and financial reports, speaking rapid Italian into his phone while making notes on a yellow pad. He looked up when she entered, gestured for her to sit, and continued his conversation. Natalie settled into the leather chair across from his desk, one hand absently rubbing her belly where the baby was doing what felt like somersaults. He was telling someone that the timeline was non-negotiable, that he needed everything transferred within 6 months. He didn't care if it was complicated. He told them to make it work. He asked someone named Ben to send him the preliminary documents by Friday. He hung up, sat down the phone, and rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. That was his attorney in Milan. He was buying a shipping company, completely legitimate, publicly traded with clean books and a board of directors who actually believe in following laws. She asked if that was good. He said it was a start. He was also liquidating 3 of his less savory operations and moving the capital into real estate development. He gestured to the papers spread across his desk. By this time next year, 70% of his income would be from legal sources. In 5 years, he wanted to be completely clean. Natalie moved around the desk to stand behind him and started massaging the tension from his shoulders. She said that was ambitious. He said it was necessary. The commission meeting made him realize how precarious his position was. He'd built an empire on fear and loyalty, but that only works as long as he's stronger than his enemies. The moment he showed weakness, he stopped. He couldn't afford weakness, not with her and the baby depending on him. So, he was building something they couldn't take away. Exactly. Legitimate businesses have legal protections, shareholders, public accountability. It's harder to make someone disappear when their name is on quarterly reports. He caught her hand, kissed the palm. He asked how she was feeling, that she looked tired. She smiled to soften the words, saying she was 8 months pregnant. Tired was her default state, but she was good. The baby was active, which Dr. Chen said was a good sign. Only 4 more weeks until he's here. The reality of that timeline hit Natalie like a wave. 4 weeks. 1 month. 30 days until she became a mother, until their son entered a world that was still far more dangerous than she wanted to acknowledge. She asked quietly if he was scared. He said he was terrified. He had no idea how to be a father. His own father was. He stopped, his jaw tightening. Let's just say he didn't have a good template to follow. It was the first time he'd mentioned his family. Natalie had learned through careful observation that Adrian's past was a territory he didn't invite exploration of. But now the door was cracked open. She carefully asked what he was like. Adrian was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said violent, cruel. He believed that power came from making people fear you, and he applied that philosophy to everyone. Business associates, enemies, family. His voice was flat, emotionless. He was 12 when he watched him beat a man to death for a perceived slight. 14 when he turned that violence on him for the first time. Natalie's hand stilled on his shoulders. He said he killed him when he was 21. Made it look like a rival family's hit. He took over his operations and spent the next decade building something different. He turned to look at her. He swore he'd never be like him, that if he ever had children, he'd protect them instead of terrorizing them. But sometimes he looked in the mirror and saw his eyes looking back. She told him he was nothing like him. He asked how she could be sure. She said because he was scared of becoming him. Because he was willing to change his entire life to give their son something better. She moved around to face him, took his face in her hands. Bad fathers don't worry about being bad fathers. They just are. He pulled her close as her pregnant belly would allow, and held on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. He said he loved her. He needed her to know that. Whatever happened, whatever he had to do, he loved her and their son more than anything. She said she knew. She loved him too. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other while the morning light streamed through the windows and the city woke up below them. Then Adrian's phone rang again, and the moment broke. He apologized, saying he needed to take this. She said she'd make breakfast, but when she reached the kitchen, she found Marcus waiting, his expression grim. He said, "Mrs. Brooks." She told him it was just Natalie. They'd been over this. He said they had a situation. The words made her blood run cold. She asked what kind of situation. Someone had been asking questions about her, about the baby, about Mr. Caruso's movements. Marcus pulled out his phone, showed her surveillance photos of a man she didn't recognize. They'd picked him up on 3 different cameras near locations she frequented. He was trying to establish a pattern. She asked who he was. They didn't know yet, but he was professional, knew how to avoid most surveillance, changed his appearance, used cash only. Whoever hired him had resources. Natalie's hand went instinctively to her belly. She asked if Adrian knew. Not yet. Marcus wanted to give her a heads up before he briefed him. He was going to want to lock her down completely, and Marcus thought she might prefer to prepare herself first. The consideration was touching and terrifying in equal measure. She thanked him. He said for what it's worth, she was safe here. The building security was some of the best in the city, and Mr. Caruso had people watching every approach, but they couldn't stay locked in here forever. He agreed. He said he'd tell him now, and to be ready for him to be difficult about this. Difficult was an understatement. Adrian's reaction to the news was immediate and decisive. Natalie wasn't leaving the penthouse until they identified the threat and eliminated it. No doctor's appointments, no fresh air, no exceptions. Natalie said that was ridiculous, trying to keep her voice level. She had a checkup with Dr. Chen tomorrow. She couldn't just skip it. He said she'll come here. He'd pay her triple her normal rate, set up a full examination room if necessary. But she wasn't going out there with someone actively surveilling her. She said she couldn't live like this. She was already going stir-crazy, and he wanted to make it worse? He said he wanted to keep her alive. His voice rose, then dropped as he visibly fought for control. Someone was watching her. Someone was gathering information about her patterns, her vulnerabilities, her life. That meant they were planning something, and he couldn't risk her being out in the open when they made their move. So, she asked his plan, to keep her locked up until the baby came? After? For the rest of their lives? He said if that's what it took. The absoluteness of his statement hung in the air between them. Natalie felt her temper flare, felt the frustration of months of restricted freedom finally boiling over. She said she didn't sign up to be a prisoner. He said she signed up to be the mother of his child. That came with protection whether she liked it or not. She said protection, not imprisonment. There was a difference. He said not when her life was at stake. Adrian moved closer, his expression pleading. He begged her, please. Just until they knew who this was and what they wanted. He couldn't focus on finding them if he was worried about her being exposed. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her autonomy, but the fear in his eyes was genuine, and she understood it. Someone was watching her. Someone was making plans. And whether she liked it or not, that made her vulnerable. She finally said 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks to figure this out. After that, she was leaving this penthouse whether he approved or not. He said 2 weeks. He could work with that. Relief washed over his features. He'd have Dr. Chen come tomorrow. He'd set up whatever she needed to be comfortable, and he would find whoever this was. He promised. The process felt both reassuring and ominous. Natalie knew what Adrian was capable of when protecting what was his, and she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to know what he'd do when he found the man in the photographs. Dr. Chen arrived the next afternoon with a portable ultrasound machine and enough medical equipment to stock a small clinic. She examined Natalie thoroughly, declared everything progressing normally, and discreetly didn't ask why she was making a house call to a penthouse with more security than most government buildings. She said everything looked perfect. The baby was positioned well, the heartbeat was strong, and she was measuring right on schedule. She said Natalie was looking at delivery within the next 3 to 4 weeks. Natalie noted that was soon. The doctor said first babies can surprise you. Could be tomorrow, could be a month from now, but based on her progression, she'd guess closer to 3 weeks. She smiled and asked if she was ready. Natalie looked at her belly, at the life that would soon be entering the world, and felt equal parts excitement and terror. She had no idea. The doctor said no one ever is, but she had good support, good resources, and a very determined partner who's called her office 4 times this week to confirm she was getting the best care possible. After Dr. Chen left, Natalie found Adrian in the nursery, staring at the crib they'd assembled together with an expression that was part wonder, part fear. She said from the doorway, 3 weeks. He said he heard. He turned to her and asked if she was scared. She said she was more than she'd ever been in her life. She moved to stand beside him. She wondered what if she was terrible at this? What if she couldn't protect him the way he needs? He said she won't be alone. They'll figure it out together. He put his arm around her shoulders, pulled her close, and if they messed up, which they will, they'll fix it and do better next time. She asked if it was that simple. He said it was that complicated. His smile was gentle. But they had each other. That was more than he ever had. They stood together in the room they'd created for their son, surrounded by tiny clothes and stuffed animals, and all the hopes they'd poured into this space. Outside, the sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Adrian said quietly that he found him. Natalie's stomach dropped. The man who was watching her. He said his name was Thomas Garrett, former military, current private investigator. He was hired 3 weeks ago by. He paused, his jaw tightening. By Antonio Marches. The name landed like a bomb. The commission member. Why would he do that? Because he wants to know if she's a weakness he can exploit. If the baby is leverage he can use against him. Adrian's voice was deadly calm. He's testing his defenses, looking for vulnerabilities, and once he finds them, he'll either use them to control him or eliminate them to send a message. She asked what he was going to do. He said what he had to do. He turned to face her fully. He was going to make it very clear that she and their son were permanently off limits, that even thinking about using her as leverage was signing a death warrant. She asked if he would kill a commission member. He said he wasn't going to kill him. He was going to ruin him. The distinction was somehow more frightening than outright violence. By Monday morning, Antonio Marches would wake up to find his bank accounts frozen, his property seized, and evidence of his more illegal activities delivered to federal prosecutors. He'll spend the next decade fighting charges while his empire crumbles around him. She asked if he could do that. He said he already had. The pieces had been in motion since Marcus confirmed his involvement. He took her hands. He told her no one touches his family. He meant it. Marx made the mistake of testing that, and now he'll pay the price. Natalie should have been horrified by the casual destruction of a man's life. Instead, she felt a savage satisfaction that Adrian was willing to go to war to protect them. She asked what would happen after. Would the other commission members retaliate? He said they'll do nothing, because they'll see what happens when someone threatens him, and they'll remember why they were afraid of him in the first place. His voice was cold, certain. The commission works on fear and respect. Marx forgot that. He was going to remind everyone else. And them? What happens to them? He said they'd disappear for a while. He had a house in the Hamptons, isolated, secure, with enough medical equipment to handle a delivery if necessary. They would go there tomorrow. Stay until after the baby comes, and the situation with the commission stabilizes. She said he had this all planned out. He said he'd been planning it since the moment he saw Garrett's photograph. He squeezed her hands. He won't let anything happen to her. Not Marches, not the commission, not anyone. She and their son were his priority. Everything else was just noise. The conviction in his voice was absolute, and Natalie felt her last reservations crumble. This was who Adrian was. Ruthless and protective, dangerous and devoted, willing to burn down the world to keep his family safe. It should have terrified her. Instead, it made her feel safer than she'd ever felt in her life. She said okay. They'd go to the Hamptons. They'd have the baby. They'd figure out what comes next together. The move happened so quickly, Natalie barely had time to process it. By noon the next day, they were in Adrian's car, which had bulletproof windows, a reinforced frame, and a driver who was definitely armed, heading east out of the city. Marcus rode in a separate vehicle with two other security personnel, maintaining a protective formation that would have been paranoid if it wasn't absolutely necessary. The house in the Hamptons was stunning. It was modern architecture, nestled into the coastal landscape, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean. It had enough space to comfortably house a small army, which Natalie realized, as security personnel unpacked equipment and established perimeters, was probably the point. She said it was beautiful, standing on the deck and watching waves crash against the shore. Adrian wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands settling on her belly. He said it was his father's. He almost sold it after he died, but something made him keep it. Now he was glad he did. Their son could grow up here in the summers, learn to swim in the ocean, build sand castles. She said he was imagining a future. He said he was imagining their future. He kissed the side of her neck. One where they're safe and happy and together. She asked if that was naive. He said maybe, but he liked it anyway. They settled into an unexpected routine over the next week. Mornings were quiet. Breakfast on the deck, watching the sunrise over the water, feeling the baby move between them. In the afternoons, Adrian worked from his office, while Natalie studied for her business classes, or read books about parenting that made her more anxious than prepared. In the evenings, they walked the beach together, security maintaining a discreet distance while they talked about everything and nothing. It was the most normal Natalie's life had felt in months, and she treasured every moment of it. But normal was an illusion, and it shattered on a Tuesday morning with a phone call that made Adrian's face go pale. He said into the phone, his voice deadly quiet, "When? How many? I see." "No, stay put. I'm on my way." He hung up, and the expression on his face made Natalie's blood run cold. She asked what happened. "The penthouse was hit last night. A professional crew bypassed security, tore the place apart looking for something. His hands clenched into fists. They didn't find them, but they made their point. She asked who it was. Unknown, but the timing suggested it was connected to the Marquez situation. He pulled out his phone, started making calls. He was moving her to the safe room now. He told her no arguments. The fear in his voice was genuine. If they found the penthouse, they might find this place. He needed her somewhere. He knew she was absolutely secure. The safe room turned out to be exactly what it sounded like. A reinforced space in the basement with its own power supply, food stores, and communications equipment. It looked like something out of a spy movie, and Natalie felt ridiculous being escorted there by 4 armed men. She muttered this was insane. Adrian corrected her, saying it was necessary, kneeling in front of her. He was going back to the city to handle this. Marcus and his team would stay with her. She was not to open this door for anyone except him. Did she understand? She asked if he was leaving. He had to. Whoever did this needed to learn that attacking his property has consequences. He took her face in his hands. He promised he'd be back before nightfall. But he needed to know she was safe while he was gone. Natalie wanted to argue, wanted to insist she go with him, wanted to do anything except sit in a basement while he walked into danger. But the baby chose that moment to kick hard. And the reminder of what was at stake made her nod. She whispered for him to be careful. He said always. He kissed her deep and desperate. He loved her, both of her. Then he was gone, and Natalie was alone in a bunker with 4 security guards, and nothing but her thoughts for company. The hours crawled past like years. Natalie tried to read, tried to sleep, tried to focus on anything except the gnawing fear in her gut. Marcus checked in periodically, his updates vague but reassuring. Mr. Caruso had arrived in the city. Mr. Caruso was handling the situation. Mr. Caruso would return as scheduled. But as sunset approached, with no word, Natalie's anxiety transformed into something sharper. What if something had gone wrong? What if whoever attacked the penthouse had been waiting for Adrian to return? She was spiraling into worst-case scenarios when the secure phone rang. Marcus answered it, listened for a moment, and his expression went carefully blank. Natalie demanded to know what happened. He said Mr. Caruso had been delayed. He said to tell her not to worry, that everything was under control. She said if everything was under control, he wouldn't be delayed. She asked what was really happening. Marcus hesitated, clearly weighing how much to tell her. There was a confrontation. Mr. Caruso was unharmed, but the situation was more complicated than anticipated. She asked him to define complicated. The people who hit the penthouse weren't working for Marches. They were working for someone else entirely. Someone who's been watching Mr. Caruso's operations for months, waiting for an opportunity. She asked who. They didn't know yet, but they made a mistake tonight. They left evidence. Mr. Caruso was tracking it down now. The clinical way Marcus described what was likely violence and destruction made Natalie's stomach turn. She asked when he'd be back. He said by midnight at the latest. Midnight came and went with no sign of Adrian. 1 in the morning, 2. At 3, Natalie was pacing the safe room like a caged animal, one hand on her aching back and the other on her belly, where the baby seemed to sense her distress and was moving constantly. At 3:30, the secure door finally opened and Adrian walked through. He looked like he'd been through a war. His shirt was torn. There was blood on his hands and a cut above his eyebrow. And the expression on his face was haunted in a way she'd never seen before. Natalie asked what happened. Moving to him despite Marcus's protests, he said he found them. The people who've been targeting them. His voice was hollow. It wasn't about territory or revenge or any of the usual reasons. It was personal. She asked how it was personal. He asked if she remembered him telling her about his father, how he made his death look like a rival hit. He sank onto the couch, suddenly looking exhausted. Turns out his cousin believed it, spent the last 12 years planning revenge. Tonight he made his move. She asked if he was dead. He said along with most of his organization. Adrian's voice was flat. He didn't want to kill him. He tried to talk him down, tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. And when he pulled a gun, he stopped, his hands shaking. He had no choice. Natalie sat beside him, took his bloody hands in hers. She said he did what he had to do. He asked if he did, or did he just prove he was exactly like his father, solving every problem with violence, leaving bodies in his wake? He looked at her, and there were tears tracking down his face. What if their son grows up and sees him the way he saw his father? What if he was creating the same cycle all over again? She said he wasn't because he cared about breaking the cycle, because he was willing to question himself, to change, to build something better. She squeezed his hands. His father never would have done that. He asked how she could be sure. She said because she knew him, the real him, underneath all the violence and power, and that man was good. That man was worth loving. He pulled her close, buried his face against her shoulder, and she felt his body shake with silent sobs. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while the weight of what he'd done settled over them both. Finally, he pulled back, wiped his eyes. He said it was over. Really over. His father's cousin was the last person with a blood claim against him. With him gone, the vendetta dies. So, she said, they were safe. He said, as safe as they'll ever be. He managed a weak smile. No more wars. No more enemies lurking in shadows. Just them and their son and the life they were trying to build. She said she'd hold him to that. He said, please do. He stood, offered her his hand. He said, come on, let's get out of this bunker and go watch the sunrise. He could use some beauty after all this ugliness. They walked to the beach together as dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. Adrian held her close, one hand on her belly, and for the first time since she discovered her pregnancy, Natalie felt genuinely hopeful about their future. The baby kicked hard, and Adrian laughed. A genuine sound of joy that made Natalie's heart soar. He said he was ready to meet them. She said another couple weeks yet. He said maybe. Or maybe he's as impatient as his mother. Natalie was about to respond when she felt it. A sudden rush of warmth, a pressure that made her gasp. She looked down to find water streaming down her legs, soaking into the sand. She said, Adrian, her voice tight with sudden fear. I think my water just broke. His expression shifted from peaceful to panic in an instant. He said, now? But she wasn't due for another 2 weeks. She said apparently their son didn't get that memo. Another contraction hit, harder than anything she'd felt before. They needed to get to the hospital now. What followed was controlled chaos. Marcus calling ahead to the hospital. Security scrambling to prepare the car. Adrian alternating between calm confidence and barely suppressed panic. They made it to the car in record time. And, as they sped toward Manhattan, Natalie gripped Adrian's hand and tried to remember everything Doc Chen had told her about labor. Adrian kept saying like a mantra that she was going to be fine. Both of them were going to be fine. Natalie managed between contractions that she knew. She just wasn't expecting it to hurt this much. He said they were almost there, 10 more minutes. But 10 minutes felt like hours, and by the time they pulled up to the hospital, Natalie was ready to commit violence herself. Dr. Chen met them at the entrance with a wheelchair and a team of nurses. She said calmly, looks like someone decided to make an early entrance. Let's get you upstairs, Anne, and see how far along you are. The next several hours were a blur of pain and pressure, and Adrian's voice anchoring her through every contraction. Somewhere around hour 6, when Natalie was convinced she couldn't do this anymore, Dr. Chen announced it was time to push. Adrian said she could do this, his hand gripping hers. He said she was the strongest person he knew. Natalie panted that she hated him for getting her pregnant. He said that was fair. He told her to hate him all she wanted, just keep pushing. And she did. Through the pain and exhaustion and fear, she pushed until finally, miraculously, a cry split the air. And Dr. Chen was holding up a tiny, perfect human being. She announced necessarily that it was a boy. A very healthy, very loud boy. They placed him on Natalie's chest, and the world contracted to just the three of them, her, Adrian, and this impossibly small person they'd created. He had dark hair like his father, and tiny fists that waved in the air like he was already ready to fight the world. Natalie whispered, her tears streaming down her face, hey little one, we've been waiting for you. Adrian was crying too, openly and unashamedly, his hand gentle on their son's head. He said he was perfect, they were both perfect. For a moment there was nothing but joy, pure, uncomplicated joy. Then the door burst open and everything went to hell. Marcus moved first, his body a shield between the door and Natalie's hospital bed. Adrian was half a second behind, positioning himself to block their son from view. But the man who entered wasn't armed. He was wearing a hospital security uniform and holding his hands up in surrender. He said quickly, Mr. Caruso, we have a situation in the lobby. Multiple individuals demanding access to the maternity ward. They're claiming family rights. Adrian's expression went deadly. He asked how many. The guard's voice was steady despite the tension. 4 that they could see, likely more outside. They were making a scene, threatening legal action. Hospital administration was minutes away from calling the police. Adrian said to let them call. He turned to Dr. Chen, who was still holding their son. He asked how fast she could discharge them. She said Italy just gave birth an hour ago. She needed rest monitoring. He said she needed to be somewhere safe, more than she needed monitoring. He pleaded with the doctor. Chen looked between Adrian's face and the security guard's tense posture, and something in her expression shifted. She'd been Adrian's doctor long enough to understand that his world operated on ardent rules. She said to give her 20 minutes to complete the paperwork and basic checks, but she was sending a nurse with them, and they were bringing them both back in 48 hours for a full examination. It was non-negotiable. He said done. He told Marcus to secure the private exit. No one gets through. The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos. Nurses moved in and out, completing checks on both Natalie and the baby, with an efficiency that suggested they'd done this before. Dr. Chen worked on discharge papers while simultaneously explaining post-delivery care in rapid-fire detail that Natalie tried desperately to absorb through her exhaustion. Natalie asked quietly who they were, holding their son close. He'd fallen asleep after nursing, his tiny face peaceful against her chest, the people downstairs. Adrian's voice was ice. He didn't know yet, but he was going to find out. Marcus was pulling security footage now. 10 minutes later, Marcus returned with a tablet showing camera stills from the lobby. Natalie recognized one of the faces immediately. Antonio Marches, looking furious and determined. Marcus said he brought muscle, swiping through images. 3 bodyguards, all armed based on their stance. They were demanding to see him, claiming the commission had authority over family matters involving MAID members. Adrian's voice could have cut glass. The commission has no authority over my son. He told Marcus to tell hospital security that those men were trespassing and should be removed. If they resist, call the police. He'd deal with the fallout. Marcus said they were claiming he kidnapped Natalie, that she was being held against her will. Then, Adrian said, let's solve that problem permanently. He turned to Natalie. When they got downstairs Ursius, he needed her to make it very clear to Marches and anyone else watching that she was there by choice. He asked if she could do that. Natalie looked down at the baby sleeping in her arms. She felt the exhaustion pulling at every cell in her body. She said she just gave birth. He said he knew, and he was sorry. But if they left without addressing this, they'll claim she was coerced. It would give them ammunition to come after them legally, to involve authorities, to make their lives hell. His expression softened. He wouldn't ask if there was any other way. Natalie looked at their son, at his perfect face and tiny hands, and felt something fierce ignite in her chest. No one was going to use her or her child as a weapon. Not Marches, not the commission, not anyone. She said okay, but he had to stay with her the entire time. He said he wouldn't be anywhere else. Dr. Chen discharged them with a portable bassinet and enough medical supplies to stock a small pharmacy. A nurse, a capable-looking woman named Elena, who apparently had experience with complicated family situations, accompanied them as promised. The group made their way to the private elevator, with Marcus leading and 2 additional security personnel flanking them. The lobby was exactly as chaotic as expected. Marches stood near the main desk with his bodyguards, arguing with hospital security, while a crowd of visitors and staff watched nervously. The moment the elevator doors opened and Adrian stepped out, every conversation died. Adrian said, his voice carrying across the space, "Marchesi, you're trespassing." Marchesi said he was exercising the commission's oversight authority. They had concerns about the welfare of Ms. Brooks and her child. His eyes flickered to Natalie, still in the wheelchair with their son in her arms. He said she appeared to be leaving against medical advice. Natalie said she was leaving because she chose to. She asked if he would like her to address the commission's concerns. Natalie took a breath, summoning energy she didn't have. She said she was here by choice. She was leaving by choice. Her son and she were safe, healthy, and exactly where they wanted to be. If he had a problem with that, it was his problem, not hers. He said she was being manipulated by a dangerous criminal. They could offer her protection, resources. She said she didn't need his protection. She had everything she needed. She looked directly at Marchesi, letting him see the steel in her expression. And if he or anyone associated with the commission approached her or her child again, she would file harassment charges. Go to the media. She'd make his life exactly as complicated as he was trying to make hers. The threat landed in the silence like a bomb. March's face went red with rage, but before he could respond, Adrian stepped forward. He said March heard her. She'd made her position clear. Now get out of this hospital before he had him removed. March said this wasn't over. Adrian said the commission had no authority over his family. He wanted to come after him?
Fine, business is business.
But the moment he involved her, he crossed a line. Adrian's voice dropped to something deadly, and he knew what happened to people who crossed his lines. Marches held his gaze for a long moment, and Natalie saw the calculation happening behind his eyes. Whatever he saw in Adrian's expression made him step back. He said the conversation wasn't finished, but he was already moving toward the exit. Adrian replied quietly, "Yes, it is. It finished the moment you threatened my son." They watch Marches and his bodyguards leave, the tension in the lobby slowly dissipating as normal hospital noise resumed. Only then did Adrian exhale, some of the rigidity leaving his posture. Natalie asked, exhaustion making her voice shake, "Can we go home now?" He said yes, let's get you both somewhere safe. The drive back to the penthouse, which had been cleaned and secured in their absence, felt surreal. Natalie sat in the back seat with their son, sleeping in a car seat that looked impossibly large for his tiny body, watching the city stream past and trying to process everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. She'd given birth, become a mother, confronted a mob boss in a hospital lobby while holding her newborn son. It was the kind of day that should have broken her, but instead she felt stronger than ever. Adrian asked quietly what she was thinking. She said that her life was insane, that she should probably be more afraid than she was, that there was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She reached for Adrian's hand, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. His grip tightened on hers. He was going to make this right. The commission, Marks, all of it. He was going to build something safe for them both. She said she knew he would. The penthouse had been transformed in their absence. The nursery was fully stocked and organized. A night nurse was waiting to help with the first few days. And Marcus had established a security protocol that would have impressed a head of state. But more than that, there was a feeling of home, of safety carved out of chaos. That first night was a blur of feeding and diaper changes and the kind of exhaustion that went bone deep. Natalie had imagined motherhood as many things, but the reality was simultaneously harder and more profound than anything she'd anticipated. Their son, they still hadn't agreed on a name, had strong opinions about everything and the lungs to express them. Adrian whispered during a 3 a.m. feeding that he was perfect, watching with wonder as his son nursed. Natalie said he was loud, that he took after his mother. She would have argued, but she was too tired. Instead, she leaned against Adrian's shoulder and let herself exist in this moment, messy and exhausted, and more in love than she'd ever imagined possible. Over the next few days, they settled into something resembling a routine. The night nurse, Maria, turned out to be a lifesaver, experienced, calm, and completely unfazed by the security presence. Dr. Chen made a house call for the 48-hour checkup and declared both mother and baby thriving. She told Natalie she was healing well, better than she expected, but to take it easy for at least another week. No lifting anything heavier than the baby, no strenuous activity, and definitely no confrontations with organized crime figures in public places. Natalie said that was a one-time thing. The doctor's smile was gentle. She said once was enough, but they did well. He was a beautiful baby. After she left, Natalie found Adrian in the nursery, holding their son and humming, something that might have been a lullaby. The sight made her heart ache with tenderness. She said from the doorway that they needed to name him. He said he knew. He'd been thinking about it. He looked down at the baby in his arms. He wanted him to have his own identity. Not his father's name, not a family legacy, just his own. She suggested, what about James? It was strong, classic. James Crusoe. Adrian tested the name and smiled. He liked it. James Brooks Crusoe. The hyphenation surprised her. She asked if he wanted him to have her name too. He said she carried him for 9 months, nearly starved herself protecting him and gave birth to him. He was as much hers as his. More maybe. He met her eyes. Besides, Brooks Crusoe sounds like someone who can navigate both their worlds. Someone who can build bridges. Natalie moved closer, looked down at their son. She asked, "What do you think, Jamie? Does that work for you?" The baby James yawned in response, which they chose to interpret as approval. The peace lasted exactly 6 days. Natalie was nursing James in the living room when Marcus entered with an expression that made her stomach drop. He said without preamble that they had a problem. The commission was filing a lawsuit. They were claiming Mr. Caruso used intimidation to coerce her statement at the hospital, and they were seeking a court order for wellness checks. She said that was ridiculous. Freely. Marcus said they knew that. But they had 3 witnesses willing to testify that she appeared frightened and under duress. They were building a narrative that she was being held prisoner. He pulled out his tablet, showed her legal documents. They filed 2 hours ago. There's a hearing scheduled for next week. Adrian appeared from his office, his expression thunderous. He said to let them file. They would countersue for harassment, defamation, and about 15 other things his lawyers were currently compiling. Marcus continued that it got worse. Someone leaked the story to the press. By tonight, every news outlet in the city would be running stories about the mob boss, his captive girlfriend, and their newborn son. The words hit Natalie like a physical blow. They were going to make them a spectacle. Adrian corrected that they were trying to force his hand. Marcus thought if he created enough public pressure, he'd have to negotiate, give up territory, pay tribute, accept the commission's authority over his family. She asked what he was going to do. The certainty in his voice was absolute. He was going to prove publicly and permanently that she was here by choice, that their family was legitimate, and that the commission had no authority over either of them. How? By giving them a story they can't twist. He turned to Natalie, and there was a question in his eyes. He asked her to marry him. The proposal hung in the air, improbable and perfect. Natalie felt her breath catch, felt James stir against her chest. She asked if that was his solution. Marriage. He said it wasn't just a solution. It was what he wanted, what he'd wanted, since the moment he saw her on that bathroom floor and realized he'd do anything to keep her safe. Adrian moved closer, knelt beside her chair. He loved her. He loved their son. He wanted to build a life with her. Not because of the commission or public pressure, but because she was the best thing that's ever happened to him. He knew the timing was terrible. He knew they were in the middle of a crisis. But he also knew that he wanted to wake up every morning for the rest of his life with her beside him. He wanted to watch James grow up. He wanted to build something legitimate and lasting and good. He took her hand. He pleaded with her to marry him. Natalie looked at him. This man who'd turned her world upside down, who'd protected her and challenged her and loved her through impossible circumstances. Then she looked at James, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos surrounding them. She said yes, she'd marry him. His smile was brilliant, transforming his entire face. He asked if she meant it. She said really, but they were doing this right. No rushed courthouse wedding, no crisis management. They would take the time to do it properly. He agreed, but they would announce it now, today. Take away Marcus's narrative before he could build it. Within 2 hours, they drafted a press release. Natalie insisted on writing her own statement, making it clear in her own words that she was marrying Adrian by choice, that James was wanted and loved, and that their family was legitimate and private. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every news outlet in the city picked up the story, but the narrative had shifted. It was no longer about captivity and coercion, but about a modern love story. The struggling student and the powerful businessman, the unexpected pregnancy that became a family. It was messy and complicated, but it was also undeniably real. March's lawsuit died in the media firestorm. Without a narrative of victimhood, the commission had no leverage. The wellness check order was denied, and the harassment claims Adrian filed moved forward with surprising speed. Natalie said a week later, watching news coverage that had finally started to fade, that he won. He corrected her that they won. She was the one who stood up to them, who made it clear this was her choice. She said it was always her choice. Even when she was running from him, even when she was terrified, she chose this. She chose him. She settled James into his bassinet, then moved to stand beside Adrian at the window. She asked what happened now. He said now they get married. They raise their son. They build the life they want, instead of the life circumstances forced on them. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, and he'd keep his promise. He was transitioning out of the family business. The shipping company deal closed yesterday, and he'd started divesting from the more problematic operations. She asked how long until he was completely out. Realistically, 3 to 5 years. Some things can't be unwound quickly without causing chaos, but he was moving as fast as he could. He paused. There was something else. He'd been approached about starting a foundation. using his resources to help kids who grow up in situations like his, give them opportunities, education, a way out. The idea was so perfect, so exactly right, that Natalie felt tears prick her eyes. She said that was beautiful. He said it was her idea, really. She said their son deserved a father he could be proud of. He wanted to be that father. But he also wanted to be someone James could point to and say his dad helped people. She said he already will. He helped her when she had nothing. He protected them. He chose to change. He said because she gave him a reason to change. He pulled her close, his hand settling on her lower back in a gesture that had become familiar. He loved her Natalie Brooks, soon to be Natalie Brooks Caruso. She said she loved him too, even though he was complicated and dangerous and occasionally terrifying. He asked if it was only occasionally. She told him not to push it. They stood together watching the city lights. And for the first time since that fateful night at the Metropolitan Club, Natalie felt genuine peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, adjustments, moments where Adrian's old life tried to pull him back, but they would face it together. The wedding happened 3 months later in a private ceremony at the house in the Hamptons. Natalie wore a simple dress that accommodated her still recovering body, and Adrian looked devastating in a tailored suit. James, now sleeping through most nights and developing a personality that was equal parts stubborn and charming, was held by Marcus during the ceremony. Dr. Chen attended along with Rita from the grocery store and a handful of people who'd supported Natalie through her hardest moments. Adrian's guest list was smaller. Marcus, his attorney, and a few business associates who'd proven themselves trustworthy. The commission sent a gift, but no representatives, which suited everyone fine. Adrian said his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. He, Adrian Caruso, took her, Natalie Brooks, to be his wife. He promised to protect her, to honor her, to build a life worthy of the love she'd shown him. He promised to be the father their son deserved and the partner she needed. He promised to choose her every day for the rest of his life. Natalie's vows were simpler, but no less meaningful. She chose him. She chose this family. She chose to believe in the future they were building together. She loved him completely, forever. When they kissed, James made a noise that might have been approval or protest. With a 3-month-old, it was hard to tell, but the gathered guests laughed, and the tension that had characterized so much of their relationship finally, fully released. The reception was small and perfect. They danced on the deck while the sun set over the ocean, James sleeping peacefully in his carrier nearby. Natalie's feet hurt, and she was probably pushing her recovery too hard, but she didn't care. This moment, this perfect, improbable moment was worth every difficulty that had led to it. Adrian asked if she was happy. She said terrifyingly so. She kept waiting for something to go wrong. He said nothing was going to go wrong. They'd survived the worst. Everything else was just details. He was wrong, of course. Life was never that simple. Over the next year, there were challenges. James's colic, sleepless nights, the slow process of Adrian extracting himself from his old life. There were moments when Natalie questioned everything, when the weight of being married to someone with Adrian's history felt overwhelming. But there were also moments of perfect joy. James's first smile, his first laugh, the day he took his first steps, holding on to both their hands for balance. Watching Adrian transform from a man defined by violence into a father who read bedtime stories and built elaborate block towers and worried about appropriate screen time. The foundation launched on James's first birthday, the Brooks Caruso Foundation for Youth Opportunity. It provided scholarships, mentoring, and support services for kids from difficult backgrounds. Adrian threw himself into it with the same intensity he'd once applied to his criminal empire. And Natalie watched him discover a passion for building up instead of tearing down. He admitted one night after a long day of interviewing program directors that he never thought he could do this. Be someone who helps instead of harms. She said he was always capable of it. He just needed a reason. Natalie settled beside him on the couch, their 2-year-old son finally asleep after a bath time battle. She was proud of him, proud of them. Look what they built from absolutely nothing. He gestured around the penthouse now filled with toys and family photos and the beautiful chaos of actual life. She finished her degree. He was running legitimate businesses. James was healthy and happy. They did this. Natalie agreed they did. Though there were moments she wasn't sure they'd make it. Like when he came home with blood on his hands and she had to decide if she could live with what he'd done. or when the commission tried to take James, or any of the 100 other moments when the smart thing would have been to run. He said, but she didn't run. She said no. She chose to stay, to fight, to believe they could build something better than what circumstances gave them. She leaned her head on his shoulder. She was glad she did. He said so was he. He kissed the top of her head. He loved her. Thank you for seeing past the monster to the man underneath. She said he was never a monster, just a man who did monstrous things to survive. She looked up at him, and now he was a man who does beautiful things to thrive. That was growth. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the city sounds filtering through the windows and James's soft breathing from the baby monitor. This was what Natalie had been searching for all along. Not perfection, but partnership. Not safety, but the courage to face danger together. Not an easy life, but a meaningful one. 5 years after that first night at the Metropolitan Club, Natalie stood in her office. Yes, her office in the consulting firm she'd built from nothing. She looked at the framed photo on her desk. It showed Adrian and James on the beach, both laughing at something outside the frame, caught in a moment of pure joy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. The foundation board meeting ran long. Could she pick up Jamie from school? She typed back, already on my way. Dinner at 7. He replied, perfect. Love you. She wrote, love you too. Simple, domestic, normal. Exactly what she dreamed of when she was struggling to survive on 3 jobs and impossible dreams. James was waiting at the school entrance when she arrived, his backpack almost as big as he was, and his face lighting up when he saw her. He yelled, Mom, guess what? I got a gold star in reading. She said that was amazing. They'd have to celebrate. He asked if they could get ice cream. She said they'd see what his father says. They walked to the car, hand in hand, James chattering about his day with the kind of enthusiasm that made everything else fade into background noise. This was what mattered. These moments, this life, this family they'd fought so hard to build and protect. That evening, sitting around the dinner table while James told Adrian about his gold star in excruciating detail, Natalie felt a wave of gratitude so intense it made her eyes water. Adrian asked if she was okay. She said she was perfect. Just thinking about how far they've come, from a bathroom floor to here, his smile was gentle. Pretty good journey. She said it was the best journey. She reached for his hand across the table, held it while James continued his story, oblivious to the moment his parents were sharing. She wouldn't change a single thing. He asked, not even the scary parts? She said, especially not the scary parts. They made them who they are. After James went to bed, after the stories and songs and negotiations for just 5 more minutes, Natalie and Adrian stood in the nursery doorway, watching their son sleep. Adrian said quietly that he was thinking about having another. Not right now, but eventually. Give James a sibling. She asked if he was asking or telling. He said asking, always asking. He turned to face her. He asked what she thought. Natalie considered the question, thought about everything a second child would mean. More chaos, less sleep, the challenge of balancing 2 kids with their careers and commitments. But she also thought about watching James become a big brother, about expanding this family they'd built from nothing. She thought yes, in a year or 2 when they were ready. But this time, they should plan it instead of having it dropped on them during a crisis. He said it was a deal. Adrian pulled her close, kissed her with the same intensity as that first night, but now layered with years of trust and partnership. He thanked her. For what? For giving him a life worth living, for showing him what it means to build instead of destroy, for loving him when he didn't deserve it and holding him accountable when he needed it. He rested his forehead against hers. For everything. She said he gave her just as much. He saved her when she was drowning, protected her when she was vulnerable, and loved her at her absolute worst. Natalie smiled. They saved each other. He said, yeah, they did. They stood together in the quiet apartment, holding each other while their son slept, and the city hummed beyond the windows. Outside, the world continued its complicated dance of power and violence, love and loss. But inside, they'd carved out something precious, a family built on choice, strengthened by adversity, and sustained by a love that had survived everything thrown at it. Natalie Brooks Caruso had started her journey invisible and alone, running 3 jobs and chasing impossible dreams. She'd been terrified and pregnant, hiding from a man she thought would destroy her. But fear had transformed into courage, hiding had become choosing, and the monster had revealed himself to be just a man who needed someone to believe in him. Now she stood in a life she'd never imagined, but couldn't imagine living without. She had a husband who'd changed his entire world for her, a son who was growing up loved and protected, a career she'd built through sheer determination, and a future that held nothing but possibility. It wasn't the safe, boring life she'd once thought she wanted. It was complicated and sometimes challenging, built on foundations that weren't entirely clean. But it was hers, theirs, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Adrian said to come to bed, tugging her hand. James would be up at 6 demanding pancakes, and she needed sleep. She asked since when he made pancakes. He said since last week. He was getting better at it. He only set off the smoke alarm twice. She said dryly, my hero. But she was smiling as they walked to their bedroom, the room they'd shared for years now. The bed where they'd held each other through nightmares and celebrated victories, where they'd built intimacy from trust and trust from honesty. As she drifted off to sleep in Adrian's arms, Natalie thought about that terrified girl on the bathroom floor, pregnant and alone, and convinced her world was ending. If she could go back and tell that girl what was coming, the fear and the love, the danger and the safety, the monster who became a man, would she have believed it? Probably not. But she would have been grateful anyway, because the best stories Natalie had learned weren't the ones where everything was easy. They were the ones where people chose to fight for something better, to transform fear into strength, to build families from the rubble of broken pasts and uncertain futures. They were stories like hers.